way, but instead, I followed her. Straight into hell. I remember the night I met Clarissa McDonald. It was at a wedding for my college friend, James Dupree. He was marrying the girl he had been with for a while, but had kept it a secret from his parents, who would not have approved because she was Indian. No one really understood why they felt that way. His parents were not wealthy or snobbish. They were just regular folks with narrow views, having never traveled much beyond their hometown. They had some money because his dad managed betting shops for a rich family, though there were whispers about their business dealings. Still, college gossip is often just talk with little truth. James was a good friend to me. For a year, he pretended to live with me. Actually, he had a room in my house, but he was rarely there unless his parents visited. Most of the time, he spent at Patricia's place, his girlfriend. Patricia was a charming Indian girl from Manchester with a lovely accent. At first, it was surprising to hear a Mancunian accent from someone wearing a sari, but once you got used to it, she was delightful. She was proud of her background and very friendly. Everyone had a bit of a crush on her at some point, but she was only interested in James. So they were getting married in a big celebration in Manchester, and I was invited. It had been about 3 years since graduation, and we were around 25 or 26 years old. By then, I was living in London and starting my job as a financial analyst. It was tough. London is a fantastic city with plenty of exciting things, but it can be hard if you're short on cash. I lived in a small flat in East London, close to the East Ham tube station. It was a mostly Indian neighborhood, which I liked because I enjoyed good curry, and there were plenty of restaurants. I chose my career in finance not because I was passionate about it, but because I thought it was a field where I could succeed with hard work. Creative work was never my strength. I could enjoy a good story or song, but I wouldn't know how to create one myself. I was good at taking information and numbers and organizing them based on certain rules, then figuring out what the information meant. Yes, I was one of those people who not only understood what the statistics teachers talked about, but could also picture it in my mind. Going into the money markets felt like the right path for me. It was either that or becoming an economist, but I didn't really get who hired an economist for their insights. It's nice to know why numbers look the way they do, but who actually pays for that kind of understanding? I thought economists made money mainly by writing books. At that time, I was still single, saying I was enjoying my freedom when people asked. I tried to hide the fact that I just couldn't seem to keep a relationship going. It wasn't like I was unattractive or messy or anything like that. I just struggled with the relationship part. I didn't know what questions to ask or what interests to share. Honestly, I didn't understand what was wrong. If I did, I would have tried to change it. I never had the courage to ask any of the girls I'd dated what the issue was. I guess I was too proud. Who wants to ask someone why they decided to end things? That felt like a recipe for sadness and embarrassment. I had my share of experiences, some good and some not so good, but I never seemed to have the same wild stories that some of the other guys at work talked about. I suspected that some of them were exaggerating, but even if half of their stories were made up, the other half were about things that never happened to me. I didn't get picked up by someone while hitchhiking or have anything exciting happen to me on the train. I just sat there, looking out the window and trying to ignore some loud person on their phone, like everyone else. I didn't find myself in fancy places with mysterious people during a blackout. Instead, I was just trying to keep entertained on my phone while the battery ran low. Anyway, I don't want it to sound like I was or am a loser. Not at all. I had my adventures. I went downhill mountain biking in Scotland with friends. I rode a motorbike on a trip through France with others. I even made some extra money selling photos and videos to stock sites, pictures of everyday scenes. A woman on a laptop, a guy cooking, the white cliffs of Dover. The kinds of images that websites often need. Although they don't make a lot individually, if you gather enough of them, you'd be surprised at how much money you can earn each month with little investment. A decent camera and some time to set things up are all you really need. You'd have to be very skilled to do this well nowadays, and I'm not that skilled. I do this mainly for extra money, not because I'm an expert with a camera. It helps cover my car payments when things go well. So, yes, I have friends, I go out, and I have my hobbies. I just haven't had much success with dating, so I've been spending a lot more time at work to get ahead of everyone else. When people ask too many questions, I would say, I don't have time for a serious relationship right now. I need to focus on my career first, and then I can think about a relationship when I have time. It was a bit of a show-off answer, and I doubt many believed it, but it helped me avoid looking lonely, and I could steer the conversation elsewhere. There I was, Richard Livingston, 26, sitting at the bar at a wedding, feeling uncomfortable in my fitting shirt, and wishing they wouldn't water down the drinks so much. It was an open bar, which was expected, but still. They weren't pouring proper drinks, so I switched from gin and tonic to bottled beer, unsure if the gin had even made it into my drink. I wasn't part of the wedding party. I knew James, but we weren't that close. I recognized quite a few people there, but James had expanded his group of friends, and I didn't share much in common with the others from university. We exchanged the usual, "What are you up to now?" questions, with everyone pretending to be really interested, but then we ran out of things to discuss. Some of them were married, some had kids. There just wasn't much we had in common. So there I was at the bar, in my suit, smiling politely at everyone and wondering when it would be appropriate to leave without making it awkward for the newlyweds. I was reminding myself that at least it wasn't an all-out 3-day wedding celebration when I asked the bartender for a bottle of Stella Artois. That's when she sat down on the empty stool next to me. I glanced over and then quickly looked back at the bartender. She was stunning. Once you look, it's hard not to keep staring. But this time I was determined to play it cool. I definitely wasn't trying hard to look composed. Not me. No, I was calm and collected. Clarissa Ann McDonald, I would learn her middle name later, had short, silky brown hair that looked absolutely perfect, as if she had just stepped out of a hair care commercial. She had wide cheekbones, full red lips, and a big smile that showed off her straight white teeth. Her eyes were smaller than you might expect, and her thin eyebrows gave her a unique look. She was definitely someone who would catch your attention more than once, maybe even 4 times if she didn't see you staring. When she talked to you, she made you feel like you were the only person in the room. She didn't look around or seem distracted. She focused completely on you and your eyes. Now I understand why she did that, but back then it was something new for me. She could make you feel interesting and like you mattered. It was a big boost to my confidence when she chose to pay attention to me. She ordered a gin and tonic. I felt a bit uneasy when she did, so I leaned in and whispered, "Get a double, it's watered down." She nodded, understanding my advice. "Got it. Thanks for the tip." After she ordered, she turned around on the stool, her legs crossed. The green dress she wore shifted slightly, and I think she was aware of it. "Hi," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Clarissa, but if we become friends, you can call me Risa. Most people do. Clarissa feels too fancy, don't you think?" That was tricky to answer. Agreeing with her could sound rude, but disagreeing wasn't a good idea either, so I played it safe. "I'm sure your parents liked it." I tried to be clever. "Oh, very good," she smiled back. "You're quick on your feet. I like that." I quickly figured out that Clarissa enjoyed playing conversational games and seeing how people reacted. This led to some lively conversations later on, where I had to remind her that our friends weren't tests for her ideas, especially not me. I thought I was good at understanding her games and could see through them, but I eventually learned she was much better than I had realized, showing me only what she wanted me to see. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell the story my way. To make it shorter, we talked for a while. She shared that she was a distant cousin of someone named James. She didn't have much family left and thought it was important to be there for family gatherings. She had studied psychology, which was what her degree was in. She graduated from Cambridge with top marks and then started working for a big company called Xerox International, ignoring her actual degree. She smiled a little at that. Now, at 29, she was 3 years older than I was, and her job title was troubleshooter, whatever that meant. She described it like this: part business analyst, part personal advisor, and part tough negotiator. The company owned many other businesses in different countries. In Spain, they built homes and insured cars. In France, they made tractors and installed lifts in tall buildings. In Switzerland, they worked on water cleaning systems and air conditioning for companies. In England, they published books and imported coffee. In China, they ran a telecom company and owned casinos. In Australia, they made luxury yachts and provided farm equipment. It was all very diverse, and she just shrugged and said, "That's how the wealthy like to do business." Her team was responsible for looking at companies that weren't meeting the expectations set by their owners. They would dive deep to analyze how the business worked, who was doing what, and who they were working with. They didn't focus much on the products themselves. As Risa said, "I wouldn't know one coffee bean from another. I drink tea," which turned out to be untrue, but I didn't find out for a long time. Instead, they looked closely at the business's processes. They figured out how everything connected and worked together. Then they evaluated the people involved to see if they were the right fit for their jobs. After analyzing everything, they'd reorganize the team to ensure that the right people were doing the right tasks. It was pure business analysis focused on how to improve processes rather than the products themselves. She shared with me that the companies they worked with typically saw a 15 to 30% increase in income within a year after they made changes, which she called optimizing. If a company didn't improve, it was either shut down or sold. However, the cost of all this experience was that her team traveled a lot for their work, which is why she was single. She looked into my eyes and said, "Career first, relationships later." I couldn't help but chuckle at this. I had used almost the same excuse for being single, but with her, it was probably true. "What's so funny?" she asked, a bit worried about my reaction. "Just think about it. You could have anyone here," I replied, speaking honestly. "Career first?" I added with air quotes. I know what that really means. People tell me that all the time. "What does it mean to you?" she asked, setting her drink down and looking at me directly. "It means it's hard to keep a relationship going with all the traveling, just like I seem to struggle with it." I was pretty sure that wasn't entirely right. With her looks, I thought others would easily be drawn to her. She just had to show up. This wasn't how I normally reacted, but this wasn't your usual conversation either. Attractive women don't usually approach me and stick around, so I thought maybe this was a trick by James or someone else. So why not just be honest? "So why do you think you can't keep it together, Richard?" She picked up her drink again, playing with the straw. It was one of her little habits I was getting to notice. She always did this when she asked something she didn't know the answer to. I shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe I just don't say or do the right things. You might have to ask the women I've let down to find out." "And yet you're not blaming women? No bitter feelings?" "Bitter?" "You know, the idea that if I can't get a date, all women must be against me, so I'll dislike them in return." "Oh no." I laughed, genuinely amused by that idea. "Women are usually quite discerning, well, most of them. I just think I haven't met the right person yet. Just bad timing, maybe. Perhaps I'm just looking for a connection that fits." I felt a bit uneasy saying that. It could be taken in many wrong ways. "Bad timing, I like that," she said, and flashed a bright smile that caught me off guard. "Okay, Richard Livingston, give me your phone," she said firmly. I raised an eyebrow at her, and she pretended to glare and held out her hand. I smiled a little sarcastically, pulled out my phone, unlocked it, and handed it to her. "Great," she said softly, then took several pictures of herself until she was satisfied with one. She saved her contact information and gave my phone back. "I'll be in town until Sunday week. Call me so we can have dinner. Let's see if you really are hard to date or just need a few tips. I love a challenge." At the time, I had no idea how true that was, and that's how I met Clarissa McDonald. To keep it short, we really clicked. The dinner at the Hawksmoor Steakhouse in London went better than I imagined, and we had another date the very next day at a unique place that served sushi and hot broth. Each person sat at a table with a hot broth and picked food from a moving belt to cook in that broth. It was similar to a sushi restaurant where small dishes go around, but this time it was all raw food that we cooked ourselves. It was clever and fun. We enjoyed feeding each other with chopsticks, and she was very good at it. She had spent 2 months in Shanghai for a project at work. After she returned home for 2 weeks, she called me, and we went out again. We went on many dates, but as time passed, some of them became less exciting. You can't have unique and costly dates every time, so some nights were just pub quizzes or takeout at home. I visited her place, and she visited mine. Hers was much nicer, on the 8th floor of a nice building near Tower Bridge. It must have been very expensive, but she had affordable rent because her company owned the building. She never complained about the half-hour journey to my place on the train, and we tried to share our time equally between our homes. We also planned weekend trips. We went to places like Dorset, Cumbria, Kent, and even a few weekends in France, where I found out she spoke French fluently. Looking back, I'm surprised at how little I noticed and how she didn't share much about herself. I discovered things gradually, like her French skills. I had no idea until she spoke a lot of French to a bellboy in Paris who had been rude. She understood what he said and warned him about informing the management. I now realize that during all our travels and plans, I never thought to ask her about her French abilities. I just accepted it as another pleasant surprise. We were getting to know each other, and there were always new things to learn. That was exciting. However, it wouldn't turn out so well later. At that time, I was blissfully unaware, caught up in the joy of a happy relationship. And with such an amazing person, I felt like my patience had paid off. I believe that waiting and not rushing into things was the right choice. We can be quite naive when things are going well, can't we? Deep down, I knew things weren't as perfect as they seemed, but I didn't want to think too hard about it. My family liked her very much. Mom and Dad, who were quite elderly by then since I was born later in their lives, thought Clarissa was wonderful. I sensed they worried about me being single for too long, but I tried not to pay attention to that. Being an only child, I didn't have to worry about siblings not getting along with her. I only met her mother 2 times before our wedding. She was a kind woman from Herefordshire near Wales, who lived alone after her husband passed away. Clarissa was an only child too, so we both understood what that was like. I felt she wasn't overly excited about me, but she made it clear she supported Clarissa's choice. While we weren't close, she wasn't rude to me. She attended the wedding, but sadly passed away shortly after from an illness. Clarissa had to deal with everything, spending nearly 3 weeks clearing out her mother's house. In the end, we received enough inheritance to buy a home in Rickmansworth, northwest of London. It was a bit far from the city, but it was our home, and we loved it. It was a semi-detached house with a small garden, 3 bedrooms, a dining room, a kitchen, a separate living room, a nice bathroom, another bathroom downstairs, and even a single car garage. It wasn't huge, but it was ours. I joked about one of the bedrooms being ready for a nursery, but it was just a joke. We both agreed to wait until we were in our mid-30s to have children. I thought that was a bit late, but I wanted what made Clarissa happy more than anything. We were happy. At least, I know I was. I hoped she was too, but with what I know now, I can't be certain. I choose to believe she was happy. Otherwise, it would all feel meaningless. Well, maybe it was meaningless, but I need to hold on to the good parts to keep my sanity. I'm trying to give you a sense of our life to show how shocking everything that happened was for me. We were content, spending weekends reading news online, sharing interesting stories, and discussing them over lunch or while walking. We took short trips together. Clarissa called them our playful weekends, smiling as she said it. Once, she even had us check into a hotel under different names, which made it seem like we were being sneaky. Looking back, I wonder if there was a deeper reason for that. She traveled a lot for work and sometimes was gone for weeks, even a couple of months at a time. When she was away, I heard from her now and then. She made it clear that her job was important and wouldn't change just because we were together or married. When she was in the field, as she liked to say, all her focus was on her job. She would reach out to me when she had a moment to breathe. I understood that. As a market manager, I also had times when I was fully absorbed in my work, but her focus was stronger than mine. I accepted it as part of her career and didn't push her for more attention. I figured that forcing a decision about our relationship might not end well for me, especially if I made it a choice between her job and me. Besides, if we wanted to start a family, things would have to shift anyway, so I thought it best not to make a big deal out of it. Occasionally I voiced my concerns, and it usually ended with her feeling apologetic. She returned with thoughtful gifts. Once she got me a new racing bike and a training stand, which was fantastic. I had wanted one for a long time, but never had the extra money to buy it without feeling guilty. Even though I advised others on their finances, my income was modest, not the huge sums they had. I did all right, but I wasn't making a fortune. It usually took a lot of risk to build wealth, and that wasn't something I felt comfortable with. Plus, she often had nice bonuses when she came back, so I learned to take the good with the bad and not upset the balance too much. While she was away, I kept myself busy. On weekends, I would ride my bike in Scotland or Wales. Once I even attempted part of the Tour de France route with friends. That was a tough experience. The athletes who compete are incredibly fit, and I realized I didn't measure up. I found comfort in knowing my friends also felt worn out at the end of each day. After 4 years of marriage and 5 years since we first met at James's wedding, everything fell apart. I realized how unaware and naive I had been, how misled I really was. The impact of it all was significant, but I'll share the story, and you can decide for yourself. I had never been suspicious of Clarissa. I had met some of her colleagues a few times at various events, parties, holiday celebrations, and retirement gatherings. I even knew the receptionist at her office in Knightsbridge since I called there often. Clarissa had a work cell phone, but she couldn't use it during work hours. In fact, she had 2 phones, one for her job and one for personal use. She explained that her company faced real security concerns, which is why her work phone was specially protected, while the personal phone posed a risk and had to stay off and at the main desk during work. When she traveled for work, she left her personal phone at home. That's why I often had to wait for her to call me. Looking back, I realize how foolish I was. Who works as a business unit analyst and can't take a personal phone when traveling for work? It seems strange now, but at the time I accepted it. I did not know much about this part of her job, and she was Clarissa. I believed what she told me, thinking that was what a supportive partner should do. Her coworker seemed friendly enough. I never actually saw her office, but I didn't think much of it then. I was proud of my ambitious wife, who traveled a lot for work. She would send me selfies from her work phone in fancy lounges or on flights, usually when she returned home. She was achieving great things, and I enjoyed sharing in her success. That said, our relationship wasn't perfect. We had our disagreements and things that bothered us about each other, like all couples do. I complained about her frequent traveling, and she often kept plans to herself. I would find out about her schedule on the day of an event, leading to conflicts, especially when I had already made other plans. One time I had enough and went skiing while she was packing for a trip the next day. She was upset and left too without saying a word. I didn't hear from her for 10 days. My pride kept me from reaching out, and she didn't contact me either. She would get upset with me for not doing the dishes. After long trips, she would come home to a messy house, and instead of relaxing, she would jump right into cleaning. That made things tense between us. One day I bought an old car without discussing it with her first. I planned to fix it up on weekends. When she found out, she was furious. In response, she bought expensive handbags and shoes that shocked me when I saw the bills. We had separate accounts, along with one for house expenses, but I couldn't help but wonder how much money she had not to mention. She spent over £15,000 in a moment, while I had saved for months for my car. What really frustrated me was when a trip to Madrid was canceled at the last minute. I had always wanted to go there. Honestly, I really hoped for a biking trip, but I knew Risa would not agree to that. So I settled for just a normal sightseeing trip. We had everything planned and paid for. Then, just 3 days before our departure, she came home looking down and said she couldn't go. Something had come up, and she promised she would make it up to me. She said the company would also make it up to us. I got really upset. For the first time, I thought about giving her an ultimatum, her job or me. I was angry, and she left on the day we were supposed to fly to Spain. She was in Germany, if you could believe that. The company did try to compensate us. They gave us first-class tickets to New York, and we spent a week there. Then we toured Washington, D.C., and drove north to see the fall colors in upstate New York, Connecticut, and Massachusetts. It was a nice time and didn't cost us anything. Still, I wanted to go to Spain, but it never happened. Now I understand why, but back then I was confused and angry. Clarissa often made decisions based on her feelings and then tried to find reasons to support those choices. She would organize facts to validate what she had decided. This was completely different from how I approached things, given my job, and it used to drive me crazy. I could see what she was doing, but I was too focused on my own issues to hold back my comments, which led to big arguments. I still believe I was right, but I've learned that being right and pointing it out to your spouse, especially when they are trying to justify a decision they have already made, are not the same. In many cases, it's better to stay quiet and let it go. We all learn in our own way. Some learn quickly, while others take longer, and some never learn at all. While everything wasn't always perfect between us, we had a strong enough bond to get through tough times. We were married. We had love, and love can overcome many things. Looking back, that thought feels a bit naive. So how did it all fall apart? It started with a night out that included dinner plans. It was Mother's Day, and although I knew Risa wasn't a mother yet, I decided it was time to seriously talk about having kids. I had made reservations at a nice restaurant and arranged for a special room. We planned to start with drinks in the cocktail lounge, then have dinner and maybe some dancing later. After that, we would relax in our room, where I had prepared champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries, which are one of her favorites. I wanted it to be a surprise, so I packed a bag for her. It included 2 of her favorite cocktail dresses, heels, perfume, makeup, and everything else she might need to feel nice while traveling. We took the train into the city, and she kept smirking at me and teasing that whatever I had planned better be good. When we walked into the Dorchester Hotel, her eyebrows went up in surprise. I finally got a smile that said, "Well, this could be all right." After checking in, I explained the plan to her. She gave me a wonderful kiss that hinted at good things later, and then we headed to dinner. But then things started to go wrong. I didn't realize right away what was happening, but I soon began to feel uneasy. We had some drinks, and then the manager guided us to our table. We looked at the menu, but when I glanced at Risa to ask what she wanted, I noticed her staring at something behind me. Her face was very pale under her makeup. I turned to see who it was, but apart from a group of men being seated, no one else seemed to be looking at us. I turned back to Risa to ask who she saw, but she had raised the menu again, hiding her face. "Are you okay?" I asked, worried. "I don't know," she replied, still looking at the menu. "I don't feel very well. Rich, can we just skip this? I really don't feel good all of a sudden." "Are you sure?" I asked, confused because this wasn't like her at all. Usually nothing stopped her from enjoying a nice meal. "We just got here and you were fine a minute ago." I could feel my plans slipping away. "Can we sit for a minute? Maybe get you some water and see if that helps?" "No," she said quickly, lowering the menu for a moment to glance behind me. Then she leaned in closer. "I really want to leave right now. Please, Rich, just for me." "All right, but I need to settle the bill." I started, but she nodded and was already standing up, turning away from the table and heading not toward the main entrance. I felt like a fool, half standing there as I watched my wife walk away. Clearly something was wrong. She had seen someone she didn't want to see and was leaving without waiting for me. I waved for the waiter, and after a moment he came over. I told the waiter that my wife was unwell and I needed to pay for the drinks. He kindly offered to bring me the bill so I could charge it to our room. As he walked away, I looked around the room, trying to see who my wife might not want to meet. While I was looking, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned to see another waiter, this one holding a bottle of wine. "Sir, this is from the table over there," he said, pointing to a group of men who had just arrived. "They sent their thanks for Miss Davies. It's a nice Merlot, their favorite. They hope to see her on Wednesday." I glanced over at the men. They were mostly looking at me, raising their glasses with smiles, a friendly gesture. They had sun-kissed skin, and if I didn't know better, I might have thought they were from the Middle East. I kindly explained to the wine waiter, "I believe there's been a mistake. My wife is not Miss Davies. She's Mrs. Livingston. Please return the wine and let them know I appreciate it." The first waiter came back with the bill and I signed it, adding a tip and our room number. The wine waiter hesitated and said, "Are you sure? This bottle costs nearly £500. I'd take it if I were you, even if it is a mistake." I shook my head. "That's still a lot of money. I can't accept it because of an error." The wine waiter chuckled. "I doubt they'll mind. They're all wealthy and this is nothing for them. They'll likely order more for dinner." That raised a question. "But I thought that was against their beliefs." "Usually, yes, but when they travel, they often follow local customs," he said, hinting at their behavior. I understood. It seemed that some people chose their beliefs based on the situation. "I see. Well, this still isn't Miss Davies, and I must find my wife," I replied, giving a nod to the group as I left. I exited the dining room, headed to the elevators, and returned to our room, hoping Clarissa would be there. She wasn't there, and that's when I started to think that something was wrong and unusual. She had seen those people, left quickly, and now they were mentioning someone called Miss Davies. I really didn't want to think too much about it, but even I couldn't ignore it. Still, I tried to convince myself it was just a mix-up. Of course, I did what anyone would do. I called her phone. It went straight to voicemail, which meant it was either turned off or she was somewhere without service like the underground. When I used the Find Your Phone app, there was no response. But interestingly, her last known location was at the hotel. This suggested she had turned off her phone rather than being on the subway. So, what should I do next? I had a lot of questions. Why had she left? Why not just come to our hotel room? If she wasn't feeling well, she wouldn't take the subway for nearly an hour when there was a paid room just above. If she wasn't sick, where had she gone? It was clear she had seen those men and wanted to avoid them. But what was this Miss Davies business about? And what about Wednesday? Clarissa sometimes had to work late or on weekends, but it didn't happen very often. In 4 years of marriage, it had been less than 10 times that she had to go into the office unexpectedly. I didn't know about anything happening on Wednesday, especially if she was the Miss Davies they thought she was. There clearly seemed to be a link unless it was just a coincidence that she was trying to escape from them. I sat at the table in the room, staring at the champagne and the chocolate-covered strawberries, trying to figure out what was going on and what to do next. I could go home or stay and wait for her. But then again, I didn't even know if she was going home. I assumed her phone being off meant she was on the subway. Where else could she go in a cocktail dress on short notice? I must have sat there for almost 3 hours, mindlessly refreshing the Find Your Phone app and thinking of all kinds of explanations for her strange behavior. Then suddenly her phone location changed. She was home, and I realized then that she had turned her phone off. I would have seen it earlier when she was coming home from the tube station. She must have done it on purpose to avoid talking to me. So I couldn't be sure if she had gone home through the tube. After all, 3 hours had passed. The tube ride takes about 45 minutes with changes, and then a 15-minute walk at the other end. It seemed likely that she had gone somewhere else first. But where? The office? That was nearby, but why would she go there? Why would she hurry to the office on a Sunday in a fancy dress when no one would be there? What on earth was going on? It was time to find out. I called her, and she picked up. "So, home then?" I asked directly. "Yes, I'm sorry. I needed some fresh air. I had to sit outside for a while to clear my head," she replied. That explained the 3 hours. Or did it? "You sat in a park in a fancy dress for 2 hours, and then what? Took the tube home?" I asked, not hiding my disbelief. "I know it sounds odd when you say it like that," she said. "But yes, I felt uneasy and just had to get out. The thing is, I knew what you were going to ask. You were going to talk about having a baby, weren't you?" Now I wasn't expecting this at all. I thought I was being careful and slowly introducing the topic. Clearly, I was easier to read than I realized. This caught me off guard. She was sounding defensive, and I had to respond. "That might have come up," I replied carefully. "The weekend wasn't all about that, but it probably would have been part of our conversation." "Right. At some point," she said slowly. "Look, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. I just instinctively knew this was where things were headed. I had a moment of confusion and panicked. Okay? Is that what you want to hear?" I panicked. I didn't know how to react. It's such a big change for our lives, and I wasn't prepared for that talk, so I left to sit in a park and think about what I want. I'm sorry. I turned my phone off to focus on our future. She wasn't quite complaining, but she sounded upset. The thing is, it did seem possible. It fit with how Clarissa often acted. I could see her doing this, except for all the nonsense about wine and Miss Davies. It hit me that she had no idea about that. She had already left, and her story missed that detail. For the first time, I began to wonder whether all was well in my marriage. Either I was imagining things, or I was being misled in a big way by her. In a way, I might have believed everything if I didn't have some other things going on that made me doubt it. So, what did I do? In my job, when you don't have enough information to reach a conclusion, you gather more data. I needed more information. In this case, it was easy to figure out. Wednesday was important. I decided to follow her to see if she left her office or if she would call me and say she was running late. If she went somewhere those guys were, or if they visited her, that would confirm my concerns. If she didn't or I didn't see them, that wouldn't mean nothing was happening, but I needed to take it step by step. This was a lead I could follow. I sounded a bit like a character from an old American cop show thinking about a lead I could chase. All I needed was an old car with flashy colors and a partner with a big hairstyle, and I could play the part. So I decided not to mention the wine Miss Davies or Wednesday, and just made noises on the phone that sounded like I believed her story. I told her I understood and was just worried about her. I said I would pack up the room and come home. If it turned out I was wrong, that I was just imagining things, then this approach was the smarter choice anyway. Plus, I must have reassured some other people too, because things seemed to happen differently than I expected. She was very sorry about how I had set everything up, spent money, and her reaction messed things up. She promised we would talk about it when she was ready, but suggested that if I came home quickly, she would make it up to me. If she was lying, she was doing a great job. But then, I thought that if she was very good at it, and might not have issues using charm to fix things. If that was true, it would change our relationship for me. So I packed up the room, taking the bottle of sparkling wine and the strawberries, hoping the chocolate wouldn't melt while I rode the train home. When I got there, as promised, I was welcomed by a thoughtful wife who wanted to make me happy. The next few days went by slowly. I had no one to talk to about all this. It felt so strange that I didn't want to share it with anyone. I didn't want anyone to say I was being silly. I felt that enough as it was. Yet deep down, I sensed that something was off. Knew might be too strong a word. Felt was better. I just felt it in my gut. Something didn't feel right, and I needed to figure this out so I could find some balance in my life. I made my plans alone, and I think this helped me get as far as I did. You'll see what I mean soon. The first thing I knew was that I shouldn't take my phone with me. Even though I could track Clarissa's phone, she could track mine too. It wouldn't be wise to show up outside her office. In the end, I bought a cheap flip phone and forwarded my number from my iPhone to the burner phone, so if she called, I would still get the message. That morning, I called in sick using the burner phone. Then I bought some clothes I would usually never wear. I got bike messenger gear, including one of those bags that couriers use, and borrowed one of my mountain bikes. I even bought a kid's set of walkie-talkies, which I attached to a reflective vest. I left early on Wednesday before Clarissa woke up. I took a cab downtown with my bike, which made the driver laugh, and then I dropped my phone off at my office before biking to her workplace. I settled into a coffee shop across the street. In my tight outfit, big helmet, bike bag, and reflective vest with a walkie-talkie, plus my oversized sunglasses, I looked completely different from my usual self. I hoped no one would recognize me, especially Clarissa. While I waited, I received a call from her. She sounded worried because I had left without saying hello or goodbye. I told her I had an early meeting with an investor in Japan, and she said she understood. My heart sank when she mentioned she might have to stay late for a meeting. She asked if I could get some Chinese food later and promised to call when she could. About 20 minutes later, I saw her enter the building. Shortly after, her phone signal disappeared, just like it always did when she started work. I walked in and out of the coffee shop to make it seem like I was busy, but I was mostly just wandering around from one place to another. I needed to keep an eye on the office, waiting for her to leave or for the group of guys to arrive. I didn't see that group of men show up, but I did see her leave around 4 p.m. She wasn't wearing the same clothes she had on when she arrived. Earlier, she had worn a tailored cream blouse, matching jacket, and pencil skirt with heels. Now, she had on a short leather skirt, what looked like tights, high heels, and a colorful coat. Her hair was different, too. She usually wore it in a small bun, but now it was styled differently. She was in a completely new outfit that I had never seen before, and her long earrings caught my attention. This was not at all like what she usually wore. She wasn't alone. A man stood with her in a shiny suit, reminiscent of Styles from a while back. He carried a briefcase and had an impressive head of slightly gray hair. He was tall and had broad shoulders. They were talking as they called a cab and got inside. London is a busy city, filled with important happenings. But it's also an old city, made for horses and carts, not for the modern traffic we see now. Even though there are fees to reduce the number of cars in central London, traffic is still heavy. Bicycles are helpful in this situation. That's why many bike messengers work in central London. The city is mostly flat, and cyclists can move around easily, often getting to places faster than cars and taxis, especially when traveling across town. Following them wasn't difficult. They didn't go far, just to a private club in Belgravia, a place I had never heard of. There are many such spots in London that have been there for ages but don't advertise themselves. It looked like something special was happening. I stood across the street watching as several fancy cars dropped off well-dressed people, including a group I recognized from the Dorchester. When they arrived, I felt lost. It was clear something was going on, but I didn't have all the details. Clarissa was involved in something that she hadn't shared with me. She had lied convincingly about the situation, probably mixing in some truth to make it believable. She used what she knew about me and our relationship to lead me astray, and she did so with skill and seemingly without regret. She was meeting people she didn't want me to know about, for reasons she kept to herself, and I had noticed. I had no idea who they were or what the meeting was about. But now I questioned everything in our relationship because she had deceived me so skillfully, almost as if she had practice. So, what should I do? Should I confront her when I see her at home? Should I try to find out what was really happening? How far would that get me? Was she involved with someone else? Was this about work? Or maybe both? Was she giving favors for a contract? Who was the other person? So many questions filled my mind. As I walked my bike along the sidewalk, I realized something important. She had lied to me so smoothly the other day that giving her time to think of a believable excuse was a mistake. I needed to act quickly. If I was going to find out the truth, I had to do it right then. I didn't know how long she would be inside with them. If I could catch them together, that would prove something was happening, and she wouldn't be able to lie with everyone there. I might finally learn the truth, or at least witness what was happening to help me figure it out. If I waited too long, she would just come up with a story, just like the last time. There were thoughts I didn't want to entertain, but they lingered. I had a problem. This was clearly a fancy, invitingly event, and I looked like a bike messenger. I couldn't get in like this. But then, I had an idea. I hurried to the nearest office building and asked at the front desk if there was a pickup for me. It was a smart move. Bike messengers were common, and at least one office might have a package for me. If I could find just one package, I could use it to help me get into the building where the event was happening. It was worth a shot. After visiting 4 buildings, I found a woman at a desk who handed me 3 packages without saying a word, barely glancing at her tablet. I put the packages in my bag and went back to the building where the event was. There were 2 entrances, one in front with security checking invitations and another on the side. I headed for the side entrance. I opened the door but was stopped by security. I pointed to my bag and said, "Where's the mail room? I have something for the managing director. He might be waiting for it for the event upstairs." The man looked me over and then nodded toward a door at the back of the atrium. "Thanks," I said quietly, walking past him and through the door, which opened automatically. I knew that I had to keep moving. Inside, I saw stairs and a hallway leading out back. I thought the hallway would lead to the mail room, and the stairs might take me to the event. At least I was inside now. I climbed the stairs, hoping there weren't any cameras and that if there were, nobody was watching at that moment. On the first landing, the door was locked, but the second one was open, so I walked through it. I was still dressed as a bike messenger, but I told myself I would pretend to be picking up something from a made-up office if anyone asked, and then I would leave quickly. As I entered, I immediately heard the sounds of a party. Moving around the corner, I paused when I saw a big man blocking the stairs. Thankfully, he was facing the crowd and didn't see me. I carefully leaned to the side to get a better look at the crowd. There were about 20 to 30 well-dressed people, mostly men in suits, gathered around. There were tables with snacks and a bar in the corner, along with waiters carrying trays of drinks. Then I spotted Clarissa. She was with a group of men, and one of them had his arm around her. He was taller than her, who was 5'9". The man who had come with her from the office was talking to another group across the room, without a briefcase. Clarissa was laughing and looking up at the man beside her. She even had her arm around him and was feeding him a strawberry. After he ate it, He leaned down to kiss her, and they shared a moment that felt very close. When they stopped, she wiped his chin in a friendly way. Then he placed his hand on her back, and she giggled. At that moment, the frustration I had been feeling for days exploded, and I couldn't hold back any longer. I didn't care about security or what was happening. That was my wife, and I couldn't just stand by. I stepped around the big man and walked confidently toward the group, taking off my bike helmet and glasses as I went. Clarissa noticed me first. Her eyes widened in surprise. "What is going on here? Who are you?" I asked the man with his arm around her. "Clarissa, you have 1 second to tell me what's happening," I said, standing firmly with my hands on my hips. "Clarissa?" the tall man asked, looking confused and turning to my wife. "Who is?" Before he could finish, security showed up behind me and grabbed my shoulders. "That's my wife!" I exclaimed. "Who do you think you are?" I shouted, and everyone around us began to pay attention. "Sir, you need to," someone said behind me. "Rich, what are you?" Clarissa said, sounding confused, still holding on to the man beside her. Then everything turned chaotic. The man she was with looked down at her, and it seemed like he finally understood something. He pushed her away and yelled, "I'm head!" In an instant, a man wearing a headdress rushed toward me, and then there was a loud noise, and he fell back. Another loud noise followed, and I felt a sharp pain in my leg. I collapsed, and Clarissa tried to help me up along with the man in the shiny suit, who was now holding a weapon. Smoke filled the air, and there were strong smells, people screaming, and everyone rushing around. I tried to stand, but my leg gave out. I looked down and saw blood on my hands. Had I been hurt? What was happening? "Come on, we need to find," Clarissa urged, putting her arm around me to lift me up. "Over there!" The man in the suit pointed towards a door across the room while still holding his weapon. Suddenly there was another loud noise, and he turned around, dropping to one knee, aiming toward a security guard who had a long gun. He shot, and the security guard fell. I was shocked at how loud everything was. It was nothing like the movies. Clarissa's friend was moving quickly, pointing his weapon in every direction, trying to watch for threats. People were screaming as the room started to clear out, with many heading for the main entrance that led to the lobby. We couldn't go that way. That would be too obvious, I thought. Wasn't that where the security was? "Help me," Clarissa whispered urgently to the man with the weapon. "Why? He's slowing us down. We have to think about our mission," he replied, looking between us. "No, we need to. Don't argue with me," Clarissa insisted. "Over there." He pointed again and then grasped my other arm, helping me to the door. He tried the handle, and to my surprise, the door opened. They pulled me into the room, and he closed the door, wedging a chair against the handle for extra security. "That won't keep them out for long," he warned, looking serious. We all took in our surroundings. It was a small office with a large window, a desk, chairs, and shelves full of books. "They won't come right away. They don't know how prepared we are yet, but they'll send someone to check it out," he explained. Clarissa nodded and pushed me down into one of the other chairs. "What a mess," she said bitterly. She glanced at me, shook her head, and then crouched down to examine my leg. It hurt a lot, and it didn't help when she ripped my leggings to see better. After feeling around my thigh, she turned to the other man and said, "It's not too serious. It went through the muscle but missed the main artery, thankfully. But he won't be running or walking much." The major sighed and walked over to the window. "We can leave now. There are enough places for us to climb down. The wall is our only nearby obstacle, and we're exposed. We should go while they are still outside, trying to assess our strength and equipment." "We can't just leave him behind," Clarissa protested. "Can we? He's a target. Well, one of them. He's not the mission, and he's in the way. He can't move, but we can. We shouldn't risk our mission for him. You know the rules. Sometimes collateral damage is acceptable. If necessary, we should do what we must to ensure he doesn't share anything." "I'm married to him," she replied, her voice tense. "No, you aren't," the major countered, looking at me with an icy expression. "You know it wasn't official." "What?" I asked weakly. "Clarissa, what?" She looked at me, her expression filled with pain. "Come on, Risa, we don't have time for this. I should take care of this now so we can leave," he said. "No!" she exclaimed, stepping between me and the major. He glared at her. I could still see his face around her. "What is happening?" I asked again. "Your wife is an MI6 agent. You're just too clueless to realize it," the Major said, sounding scornful. "Major, one more word and—" Clarissa began, standing tall. "You'll what? We might end up in a dangerous situation because of this mess, and we need to get out now. You can deal with me later if we survive, but right now we won't unless you act, and you know it." "Clarissa, is this true? Are you—" I asked, feeling weak. The blood was flowing from my wound, and the news I was hearing was just too overwhelming. She turned to me, her eyes filled with a mix of hardness and sadness. "Look, yes, I'm a field agent. You've stumbled into something you shouldn't have. I can't even explain how you got here. You should never have approached this place. This isn't about you or us." "What us?" I said in pain, rubbing my injured leg as though that would ease the hurt. "Yes, you're just a pawn," the Major said, staring out the window without looking at me. "You were chosen because you trust easily and believe what others say, and she could lead you anywhere without you questioning it. You are the perfect cover because no one would guess you are married to someone working in the field. Right now you are just a burden, and we need to leave," he repeated firmly. "You're just trying to hurt him, Major," Clarissa said as she turned to face him, anger showing on her face. "You're just trying to provoke him so that he gets angry with me." "No, I want him to understand the truth," the Major replied, testing the window lock, trying to push it open. "Here's the thing, ma'am," he said, emphasizing the word ma'am in a very disrespectful way. "I'm leaving, with or without you. He's not going anywhere. You can stay here with him or come with me. You know what you have to decide." Clarissa looked at me, her eyes filled with worry. "Is it true?" I asked, biting my lip against the growing pain in my leg, which was really starting to throb now. "It's complicated, Rich. It's not—" "I understand, so that's it. An easy target. Well, you lasted 4 years, I guess. More than I ever had before," I said bitterly. Then I nodded at the Major. "Give me the gun," I said, holding out my other hand, trying to ignore the pain. He paused for a moment, looking at me and stopping his efforts to open the window. We could hear people moving outside the door. Time was running out. "Why?" he asked cautiously. "So I can protect you. If you go out the window without me, they will catch you before you can get far. Give me the gun so I can help you." "You're right, I'm not going anywhere, but you can. Give me the gun," I insisted one more time. "Rich, I can't," Clarissa began. "Honestly, just this once. Just go do what you need to do. I'm just here as a distraction, and it's clear I don't matter, or you wouldn't have kept secrets from me." The Major walked over and handed me the gun, looking into my eyes, weighing whether I would turn it on them. I took the gun and nodded, pointing to the window. "Go now. Take the spy with you. For what it's worth, Clarissa, you did a good job. I really cared about you. Just go." I turned my head and faced the door, holding the gun out, willing my arm to stay steady. I heard her say, "I'm sorry, Rich. The mission." That was the last thing she said to me. I heard the glass break as the Major, frustrated with trying to open the window properly, threw something at it. At the same time, I pulled the trigger, shooting a hole through the door, aiming high to warn anyone outside not to come in too quickly. I have no idea if they made it. I hope they did. I fired 2 more shots, high up so no one outside would get hurt, and held out for almost 3 minutes. Then suddenly, the door burst open and a loud sound filled the room, followed by a bright flash. I didn't remember anything after that. I awoke 3 days later, and what I later learned was the basement of the Saudi Arabian embassy. For the next week, I faced harsh treatment while the Saudi security tried to figure out who I was and why I was there. I decided right away to tell them the truth about myself and my connection to Clarissa. Naturally, they didn't believe me. Now I have injuries. I lost part of my ear and can barely see out of one eye. My nose is crooked from being broken. I have lost my molars, my left arm is weak, and I can't move my little and ring fingers well anymore. I can't walk properly because of an untreated injury in my leg. During the first questioning, they kept speaking in Arabic to see if I understood. I remember sitting in a chair while one man spoke to me, and another caused me pain with a sharp object. I think the man in front was trying to communicate a warning about what was happening behind me, and they wanted to see if I would react. I'm surprised I'm still mentally okay, though it's hard to tell. I felt so disconnected from reality that anything could have happened, and I might have just accepted it. I have been held in a small space for quite a long time, perhaps over a year now. Time feels unclear. I seem to be a problem for the Saudis. It turns out I interrupted an important operation involving British intelligence. Clarissa had been trying to gain information from someone linked to a previous incident, but when she recognized me and said my name, it changed everything. The Major thought security was coming for her, so he acted to protect her, which caused a fight where I got caught in the middle. Now that they have me, they might usually choose to make me disappear. However, following a major incident with an American journalist, a high-ranking Saudi official decided I should not be killed, just in case they needed me later for something important. They couldn't let me go, and there was no way for me to leave the embassy without someone noticing, so I was stuck in the basement. I was in a small space that allowed me to stand up, with a cot and a basic toilet that would be emptied once a day. I thought we were in the Saudi embassy, but I wasn't sure. In fact, I wasn't certain of anything, even what day it was. For a week, I was questioned repeatedly, giving them the same answers each time. By the end of that week, they told me my identity was erased. Clarissa MacDonald, also known as Livingston, was said to be dead, the same incident that was supposed to have claimed my life. My own government had abandoned me, just collateral damage. The people holding me didn't know what to do, so I stayed in the basement. Sometimes they would try different methods to break me. One week, I was not allowed to sleep. Another week, they played loud religious music continuously. They even tried to hypnotize me, but I was so distressed that it didn't work. They couldn't understand why I would want to protect someone who had treated me poorly for years, someone who probably never truly loved me. I tried to explain, but the idea of true love for its own sake didn't make sense to them, so I stopped trying. The only one who was kind to me was one of the 3 guards who watched me day and night. His name was Saad. He was the only one who introduced himself. He occasionally brought a small TV at night, even though it was probably against the rules. He didn't watch the news, but I would catch glimpses of different shows. He also sneaked me some food from his own meals now and then, but this stopped when I heard someone yell at him. The regular food was dull and not enough, and I lost weight fast, making it impossible for me to fight back. I often found myself staring at the wall, wondering what Clarissa was doing. Who was she with? Did she still go by that name? I thought about what name might suit her better. I wondered if she ever thought of me, or if she knew I was still alive. I reflected on how blind I had been, going over our time together and searching for missed hints or trying to make sense of what had happened. So many questions filled my mind. Was that her real name? Was her mother really her mother? She had gone to manage her estate on her own. Could that have been true? Had she harmed others? Would she have harmed me if I had confronted her differently? Did she ever love me, or was it all just a lie? How had I become their target? What was the problem inside me that made it hard to have a real relationship? The only one I managed to have was built on a lie from the start. At some point, I stopped hoping for rescue. It was clear my captors were not going to let me go. I knew the king's warning not to harm me would not last forever. Someday they would just come in and hurt me. I even started to think about how they might do it. I wondered which would hurt the least and be the quickest. I honestly think I started to lose my mind. This is what happens when regular people are put in hopeless situations. They start to break down. And no one was more average or more of a loser than me. My wife's betrayal led to so much more pain, and I felt powerless to change it. Was she really my wife? Based on what the Major said, it didn't seem so. I felt like a tool for her, used and then discarded. But I didn't understand what an agent would need someone like me for anyway. To the whole world, I was gone. No one was searching for me. I was just someone everyone chose to ignore. The Saudis seemed to enjoy reminding me of this. They probably thought they could change my loyalty. But what was the point? I wasn't of any value. No one from the group Clarissa worked for would ever try to save me. Even if I escaped, I couldn't be trusted to speak freely. It was puzzling why they insisted on reminding me of how abandoned I was. I guess they were bored and just wanted something to entertain them. I started losing weight, more than I already had. I was eating, but I didn't really care. What was the point? They were going to end my life eventually, and I wasn't getting out unless they let me go. So why hold on to hope? That's how things went until one day, everything changed in unexpected ways. There was a commotion outside. I could hear it beginning even through the thick walls. Voices raised, chants, and loud noises. Some shouts and screams filled the air. Saad was on duty then. I saw him keep going to the door, unlocking it, looking out, and then locking it again. He tried to call for help on his radio but got no response. At one point he looked at me and pulled out a firearm. I didn't know if it was for me or the noise from outside, probably for both. They couldn't risk letting me walk out alive after what they had done to me. Then, suddenly, the door came crashing down, and the sound was so loud it nearly hurt my ears as I was thrown to the back of my cage. It took Saad's life immediately because he was next to the door when it happened. Thankfully, he didn't have a chance to hurt me first. People rushed through the door, but I barely noticed them since my mind was a mess. They were young, angry, and looking for trouble. Later, I learned this was part of an Arab Spring movement. The Saudis had been involved in something terrible, and the local people in London finally decided to take action and stormed the embassy. In the chaos, they found me. The reason they had explosives and were breaking down doors was never explained. In the end, I was rescued by people who wanted to help me, not hurt me. An ambulance was called, and I was carried out by excited young men, all with beards and shouting phrases in Arabic. I was taken to Imperial College, where they helped me with my health issues and tried to fix the damage done to me. They used some tissue from my thigh to create a new ear. While it looked okay, it was more for appearance and never looked completely natural. My fingers were fixed and set correctly this time. They wouldn't move like they used to, but at least I could bend them again. They couldn't do much for my eyesight, but they helped my arm move better again with some therapy. I was questioned almost non-stop by the security services. They never introduced themselves properly, just said they were from the security services. I asked for their names, but nobody provided any. I gathered that people from Special Branch to MI6 wanted to talk to me. They asked about my experiences and who had questioned me while I was held, going on and on about it. At no point was any media allowed near me, nor was I allowed to see them. I didn't even get to watch TV. I felt like a prisoner in the hospital, just as I had in the embassy. A grateful government, I thought to myself. They seemed unsure about what to do with me, and I waited there for almost a month before they decided I was ready to recover. This was their way of saying, "We need our space back, please." Clarissa never came by, not that I thought she would. For all I knew, she was gone. Don't field agents often have short careers? No one would answer my questions about her or anything that happened after that day. When I asked, everyone just stared blankly at me. No one wanted to discuss her or that major character either. The day arrived and I was taken out to a waiting black SUV at the back of the hospital. I was brought to another room in some government office. I entered a room with tall ceilings and wooden walls. In the middle stood a large desk lit by a floor lamp. I was seated in a chair facing the desk where a clearly busy man sat. He wore a nice but slightly wrinkled suit. His collar was open, tie a bit loose, and his hair was graying and thinning. The desk was covered with papers and folders, with no computer or phone in sight. He was carefully going through each folder, reading the documents inside. After a few minutes, he sighed, leaned back, then shifted forward, cracking his back. "What a frustrating waste of time," he said, gesturing at the papers and looking at me. "A difficult task ahead. Still, we must check everything. Can't overlook anything," he continued, as if I understood what he meant. "Well, Mr. Livingston," he said, peering over his glasses as he leaned back and put his hands together, "we have a puzzle to solve regarding you." He considered me for a moment before continuing. "Of course, we can't keep calling you Mr. Livingston. Richard Livingston is gone, as is his wife. Unfortunately, he won't be returning today. For now, you'll be Mr. Smith until we think of something better. John Smith for now. I am Mr. Thurgood. A decent name for the time being. So, Mr. Smith, what should we do with you? You've been through a very difficult experience. There's no denying that. Some might say you brought this on yourself by getting involved in a sensitive operation, one no one asked you to join." I scoffed. "Don't blame me for this. I wouldn't have been there if your operative hadn't picked me as cover in the first place. Don't try to shift the blame. That won't work with me." I had never been so forward before my experience, but after everything it felt different. What was the worst they could do to me, worse than what I had already faced? The man continued to stare at me, and the room fell silent. "Regardless, it's all very unfortunate. We've lost any advantage with the Saudis. After that situation, they are now cautious. We've lost 6 months of intelligence work, and you lost nearly 2 years of your life. We had 2 senior field agents exposed and had to work hard to restore calm. The impact on sales of our equipment to their country is enough to worry the ministers. That's too bad, I replied, not feeling concerned. I'm not very worried about how much effort you put in, I said. I understand your feelings, Mr. Smith. If I were in your place, I might feel the same. I'm just here to inform you about the situation. I don't expect you to care too much. He didn't seem bothered by my response. I'm sure you're upset with us for not helping. To be honest, we thought you were gone. The agents reported loud noises and a window breaking in the room you escaped from. They assumed you might have been hurt or worse. We watched the hotel to see if anyone moved your body but saw nothing. The same with the embassy. It puzzled us that we didn't see anyone taking you away. That said, you now have information that cannot be shared publicly. The Saudis will deny everything, as they are skilled at silencing people. This whole event is a big mess and a political issue for the current leaders. As much as I dislike it, we need to protect our officials. We are good at disrupting other governments, but can't allow the same fate to happen to ours. Then there's what you've experienced. I admit it's been tough for you. Our agent's harsh treatment directly caused the problems with the operation and your unfortunate situation with the Saudi government. Yes, we understand your struggle. You didn't ask for any of this, and you didn't deserve it. But what's done is done, and we need to find a way to move forward. He looked down and picked a specific paper from the folder on his desk, tossing it towards me. With that in mind, the UK government would like to offer you £8 million, tax-free, for your troubles. It comes with conditions, though. You'll need to sign a document to protect the UK government and its agencies from any legal action, and also a gag order preventing you from discussing this situation or how you received this amount. Do you understand what I'm saying, Mr. Smith? He leaned back, his head forward, casting a shadow across his face. I glanced at the paper. It had numbers, with the amount of 8 million highlighted. I think so. You were never here. I was never here. I was never a guest of the Saudi Arabian government, and I never got married either, right? That's correct. We will give you new papers, a new story, and a new name. Everything will be real since we are the ones who handle this type of thing. As for your marriage, Mr. Richard Livingston may have been married, but Mr. John Smith, or whoever you become, was not. Mr. Livingston is no longer with us, so his marriage ended long ago. He folded his hands and smiled in a creepy way. I'm glad you see how tricky this situation is, Mr. Smith. I want you to know that what happened to you with the Saudis is being dealt with. They are still facing consequences for that, I assure you. I can't share all the details, but rest assured it is happening. I know this might not give you much comfort right now, but your government is not ignoring this. They just expect me to move on? I said before I could hold back. Angering this man wouldn't help me. Though I wanted to lash out, I knew that wasn't the answer. I needed the money to rebuild my life since everything else was lost. Mr. Thurgood looked troubled. It's certainly a sad situation, Mr. Smith. I wish I could say more to make things better, but it is what it is. I hope the money helps ease your burdens. As I said, it's tax-free since it's in a bank in the Cayman Islands. Not only is it safe from your country's tax collectors, but even the American IRS can't touch it. Additionally, the UK government will provide you with private health care for all medical issues for the rest of your life, especially for injuries from the past 2 years. We feel responsible for that. Beyond this, I'm not sure what else we can do at this moment. What about my ex? Is she still around? Talking with her might help, what did you call it? Smooth things over? I didn't know what she would say to me, but I knew what I wanted to say to her. None of it was kind. I had spent a long time thinking about it. Mr. Thurgood looked even more troubled when I asked about her. I'm sorry, but I can't discuss Mrs. Livingston's current situation. I'm just a civil servant, and that's beyond my role. I can't confirm or deny where she is or what she's doing, nor can I arrange a meeting, even if it were possible. I will pass your request up the chain of command. You never know what might happen. Someone might have a good day. He made a note on a pad in front of him. That said, Mr. Smith, I can offer you one thing. It turns out that Mrs. Livingston took everything from the family home after your imagined passing, and all those belongings are in storage, available to you. Since you are an only child and your parents are older, there was no one else to inherit these things, so they are still sitting in the storage unit. Mrs. Livingston has said that she considers them all yours, and you can take anything you want from that storage." He then pulled out a few sheets of paper from the folder and handed them over the desk, tossing a pen on top of them. "This is a copy of the Official Secrets Act, and I need you to sign it. This ensures your silence about these matters, something I trust we won't need to enforce, will we, Mr. Smith? The other document releases the UK government from any legal claims regarding these unfortunate events. If you could please sign these, we will arrange for you to stay at the Savoy, with the bill already paid for the next 60 days, giving you ample time to decide your next moves. We will be in touch regarding access to the storage and details on how to reach us about the money and medical coverage we discussed." I signed the Secrets Act, knowing it was standard procedure. Then I picked up the other form and started reading it. While I did that, Mr. Thurgood continued. "Now, as I mentioned briefly before, these benefits come with conditions. You can never go back to your old life, Mr. Smith. That means no contact with anyone from before. No Facebook chats with old friends, no phone calls to your former job or clients, or even your parents who think you are gone. You will be a new person with a new history. We will be watching you. Do you understand, Mr. Smith? Do not even think about writing books or doing interviews. To be honest, that could be very dangerous for you. And I don't just mean from us. The governments in the Middle East do not take kindly to being embarrassed, and they might take action against you if your name comes up. You need to stay low, enjoy your new resources, and build a new life for yourself. If you keep bringing up the issues from the past 2 years, I think you will face some financial troubles that I'm not sure you can handle. We both understand each other, right, Mr. Smith? When he mentioned these troubles, I had just seen them in the document he wanted me to sign. If I spoke out about what happened to me, they wouldn't just want the money back. They would want even more. By signing this contract, I would be legally responsible for it." I leaned back with Mr. Thurgood looking at me. This was the big question. What did I want now? While I was trapped, I had not really thought about what would happen after I got free, aside from facing Clarissa. By the end, I had almost given up hope. Once I was free, I thought about it a little. But since I had been kept away from the world for so long, I had no idea what my choices were. It seemed clear that I was a problem for both the UK and Saudi governments, but at least the latter didn't keep me trapped like that. Still, I had no true plans for what to do next. And now, here I was, being offered a large sum of money to move on and stay quiet, to be a good person and let others handle the big conversations over drinks. But did I even want to be part of that world again? So far, everything I had seen had been terrible for me. How much more could I take? Would it hurt my spirit or my health? Should I really push for change, even if I felt I had a good reason? It hadn't worked out well for me before. On the flip side, no matter what I decided to do moving forward, having money would make things easier. The truth was, I would never return to my old job as a financial analyst, not with a 2-year gap in my history. Even if the new documents helped, the job market moved fast. If you were away for almost 2 years, especially while being isolated in an embassy, facing an interview would be tough. I also doubted the UK government would give me any references for the time I was away or even before that. I couldn't exactly call on real references now, as one of them was gone. Even if they did help, I wasn't sure they'd hold up if someone called for a job reference. You need real experience for that. No, I couldn't go back to managing money unless it was just for myself. This was the only thing I really knew how to do for work. So, about the money? What were the terms? Were they really that strict? Would my choices cause problems for anyone? Probably just me. I understood their point about being a target. I believed them. I had experienced the hospitality of the Saudis once, and I didn't want to go through that again. I knew that next time wouldn't end well for me. Thinking back, it was probably best to sign the papers, take the money, and disappear. I didn't need to decide right away. There was still time for that. I glanced at Mr. Thurgood, who I believed had noticed my thoughts changing on my face. Clarissa often said I was easy to read. She could always tell what I was thinking. Now I understood where she learned that skill. It seemed clear to me that even someone who didn't know me could see it too. I shrugged in my mind, took the pen, and signed the other document, rules and all. "Excellent decision, Mr. Smith. The right choice. The only choice, if I may say so," he said, leaning forward to take the signed documents. "I'll make sure you get a copy of this, along with your new identity soon." He checked my signature, making sure I had used my real name. "Great," he said quietly, then looked up at me and added, "I think this wraps up our business. When you leave, someone will be there to take you to the Savoy. As I mentioned, we have rooms reserved for you, and we've arranged a selection of clothes and basic toiletries. You will receive access to the money tomorrow, including a credit card and details about the account." As I stood to leave, he looked at me more seriously and said, "Mr. Smith, one more thing. We will be checking in occasionally to ensure that we are all following our agreement." He held up the document. "These visits will be random and they may feel intrusive. I apologize for that. We need to be careful, and so do you. The stakes are high for you, so please stick to the terms for everyone's sake." He held my gaze a moment longer to make sure I understood. I nodded, turned, and walked to the door, which opened for me. I didn't look back at Mr. Thurgood. I never saw him again. Part 2. Lucas Faring. 4 years later, I was settled in my new home, doing my best to live my life. I had decided back then to move on, not to look back, and to focus on the opportunities ahead of me. Mainly because of the money, let's be honest. While sitting in the suite at the Savoy, I thought about what I wanted for my next chapter. I had received my new identity. I was now Lucas Faring. I had been born in Hastings, Kent, and I was ready to enjoy life. I finally had access to money, so some of the first things I did were go out to eat, watch a movie, buy some books, and catch up on television shows to reconnect with the world. I thought hard about what I wanted, and narrowed it down to a few key points. The first was that I wanted to leave this country. I knew the UK government might keep an eye on me, but I wasn't going to make it easy for them. Plus, I wanted to make it hard for anyone from the Middle East to find me as well. If I was going to move abroad, I needed a few things. First, I wanted to go somewhere where English was widely spoken. I didn't want to stand out because I couldn't communicate easily with locals. It needed to be an international spot so I could travel if needed. Living in the middle of Australia was out of the question. I also wanted a place where I could keep a low profile, have my own home, and receive deliveries from Amazon. This ruled out New Zealand, as I needed convenience too. I wanted to be near water. The injury on my leg had mostly healed, but I couldn't ride a bike anymore due to pain. My fingers struggled with the bike's controls, and my vision had changed as well, so biking was not an option for me. I was disappointed, but switched to rowing instead. It still caused some discomfort, but it was much easier. I tried running, but that didn't work for me at all. Rowing was the answer. I learned that rowing on water lifted my spirits much more than doing it at home, so being near water was important. I wanted a place that was not too hot or too cold. It had to be close to a city, but not right in the middle of it. I wanted a home that felt a little secluded, but not so difficult to reach that I needed a helicopter or a boat. My trust in people had changed, and I wasn't keen on forming close connections again. However, I still wanted to be close enough to visit restaurants, see movies, and shop at places like Asda or Walmart, as it turned out. In the end, I found myself in the good old US of A, specifically in Maryland, just outside the city of Salisbury. I bought a place near the water, right off the Wicomico River, which lead into the Tangier Sound and, eventually, the Chesapeake Bay. It suited my needs just fine. It was close enough to Salisbury to enjoy some city life, yet far enough away to have my own space. It also had electricity and clean water. Surprisingly, my cell phone worked well here, unlike some places. I even had satellite internet, which allowed me to watch Netflix and more. During my research, I found out that if I brought $500,000 into the country, I could get a green card right away. So, after transferring $500 from my bank in the Cayman Islands, I received my green card within 6 months of moving to the U.S. I settled into a 3-bedroom house with a big kitchen that had bay windows overlooking a small dock. The property was on 3.5 acres, with a private driveway winding through a small wooded area. My nearest neighbor was at least 1/4 of a mile away and not visible. Across the bay, I could see a house far in the distance, just a tiny sparkle of lights. The master bedroom had skylights with covers that could open and close. It was wonderful to lie in bed at night, gazing at the stars above, so bright due to the low amount of light nearby. I even bought a nice telescope for stargazing. I upgraded the kitchen, made sure the entire house had internet, installed speakers throughout, and checked everything in the house to fix any issues, including putting on a new roof. I was quite pleased with how it all turned out. The home had a nice wraparound deck, and the master bedroom had a small balcony. I also had a hot tub put in for the chilly evenings. With plenty of natural light, I made a small greenhouse on one side for vegetables that would survive the cold winters and set up a grilling area on the other side. I took a few pieces of furniture from the house Clarissa and I had shared, but ultimately I only kept 6 items and donated the rest. I took the double lounger where we spent many evenings watching TV together, a side table my parents had given me through my grandmother, some plates from another grandparent, and a table we found at an estate sale designed for plants. Looking through the belongings, I realized I had no keepsakes from Clarissa's family, no gifts or anything meaningful, which was a big sign I had completely missed. For transportation, I had a Kia SUV, a small single rowing boat, a larger fishing boat with an outboard motor, and a small Harley-Davidson motorcycle that I used from time to time. The house had a 2-car garage outside and a small boathouse at the end of the dock, just big enough to keep the fishing boat safe during winter. I spent my days trying out different hobbies. I decided that if I worked again, it would be something I truly wanted, not just a job I had to do. I didn't focus on my old finances, but I did use what I learned to manage my own money. The funds from the UK moved through several accounts at different banks, and by the time they reached a bank in Jersey, no one could trace them anymore. It was my money, and I felt secure knowing it was safe. I attempted to learn how to fish, but found it a little too sad for my liking. It took a perfect day and mood for me to take the larger boat out and try my hand at it. I enjoyed rowing, and I did that every day if I could. On stormy days or during the cold winter months, I would use the machine in the second bedroom while watching episodes of Stargate SG-1 on the big TV mounted there. I continued with photography, but now it was just for fun. I even started astrophotography after realizing that I could turn the telescope I'd bought into a big lens for my digital Canon. It was great to get back into that, even if I no longer focused on stock photography. I did sell some prints of the moon and other planets. I tried writing too, thinking it was something people in my situation might do. However, I quickly confirmed that financial management was a better path for me since my writing wasn't very good. I gave that up and bought a Kindle Paperwhite instead to read what others had written. My reading material changed quite a bit. In the past, I mostly read fiction, especially adventure or science fiction. Now I found myself drawn to nonfiction, especially books about the intelligence field. I wanted to learn more about Clarissa's world and what her work was like. I tried bowling, but my leg and fingers made it hard to be competitive. I fared a bit better with shooting. Since I was in the US, I thought I might as well give it a shot. I bought a Glock 9mm and went to the shooting range to see if I could hit anything. I soon realized that, like many things, starting with some good advice and lots of practice made all the difference. In addition to everything else, I traveled around this new country of mine. I visited places I had always wanted to see. I went to New York and watched the Book of Mormon on Broadway. I spent 3 days exploring the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. I hiked down into the Grand Canyon, and then took a helicopter ride to Las Vegas, where I enjoyed strolling through various casinos. I took an amazing road trip through California, driving from San Diego to San Francisco in a convertible. I enjoyed sweet donuts and shrimp sandwiches in New Orleans. I watched the Cubs play at Wrigley Field and strolled through a grassy area in Dallas. I went on a whale-watching trip in Seattle and rode a part of Route 66 on my motorcycle. I had a good time, even though I was mostly alone. I realized there is a difference between feeling lonely and being by yourself. For the most part, I was okay with being alone. I didn't really need anyone else, and my own doubts and fears made it hard for me to build strong friendships. I did have friends I could hang out with when I went into town, and I even hosted a few BBQs and took some guys fishing. However, I wasn't in a hurry to connect with anyone. I wasn't looking for companionship and avoided situations where that might happen. I considered seeking help, but I didn't know how to explain my feelings. I couldn't share my true story, and I doubted anyone would believe me. Even if they did, I knew the government wouldn't appreciate my revelations, even if speaking up could help me. If I couldn't be truthful with my therapist, then it wouldn't really help me. That much I understood. Instead, I kept to myself and grew my hair long to cover my ear. While the surgery I had was okay and helped me hear better, the ear didn't look quite right. It was a bit shiny, and people could sense something was unusual, but they often couldn't pinpoint it until they realized it was my ear. Covering it up with my hair made things simpler, so I wouldn't have to talk about it. I just lived my life as best as I could, even if sometimes it felt a bit empty. Holidays were particularly tough. Celebrations like the 4th of July or Thanksgiving were usually fine since they weren't days I had special memories tied to. However, holidays like Guy Fawkes Night, Christmas, and New Year's were more difficult. I tried to celebrate New Year's at a bar, hoping to see how the Americans celebrated, but it was loud, and everyone was already in groups. I quickly learned it was easy to feel very alone in a crowded place. I mention all these details so you can understand my state of mind and what my life was like when the first of 3 important events that changed my life after moving to the USA took place. The first event happened suddenly, and it gave me context that I didn't realize I needed. I thought I had left that part of my life behind, but past experiences have a way of coming back to the surface. I think I need to read less Deepak Chopra and more Stephen King. It was a Sunday in May. The cold winter was behind us and the weather was just right, not too warm or too cool. I had driven to a small diner on the edge of Salisbury, known for its great breakfast. I enjoyed my muesli, followed by a delicious omelet filled with ham, lobster, mushrooms, and avocado. Yes, even here. I had just paid my bill and tipped Mabel, the waitress, $15 when I heard a familiar voice behind me. Without thinking, I turned around. I recognized it because it was another British accent, and I hadn't heard one in months. As an expat, I couldn't help but take notice. The voice was one I had heard once before, just for a few minutes, yet it stuck in my mind like ancient drawings on cave walls. It was the Major. When I turned, I saw him standing near a booth with a woman and 2 children. He looked at me while also talking to them. "Lucas," he said, surprised, using my assumed name. "I had no idea you were around." He stepped closer, wrapped his arms around me for a quick hug, and whispered, "Play along, follow my lead." Then he stepped back with a big smile. "If you're here and found me, it must be something important, right?" His smile faded as he looked at the blonde woman who had just come out of the booth, seeming upset. The 2 children were with her, one barely walking and the other around 3 or 4 years old, staring up at me. They looked like little versions of the Major. Was this his family? I found that surprising. I didn't think field agents were allowed to have families. "Dear, this is Lucas Faring. He's a client of sorts. If he tracked me down here, he must have something important to share." "Is this work, Daryl? We had an agreement." Her voice was sharp and annoyed, her arms crossed, showing her displeasure. "Yes, I'm sorry, dear. I need to handle this. It's not my choice. My old friend Lucas here clearly needs to tell me something important, and it may affect other things happening. I promise, just an hour, maybe an hour and a half, tops." He seemed to plead with her. A field agent worried about his wife. She glared at me and asked, "Is this true? You couldn't just leave him alone on his vacation?" I didn't get a chance to respond. I just raised my hands, unsure of what to say. But Daryl, the Major, arrived first. "Don't blame him, hun, that's not right. Whatever's happening is important and might affect other things. You know there are a lot of issues right now. We probably just need to take a step back from one of them, right, Lucas?" I nodded and stayed quiet. It felt safer that way. "Take the kids and check out that farmer's market down the street with all those interesting stalls. Please. I know this isn't what we had in mind, but it's just for an hour and a half. It's clearly important. I will meet you back here in 90 minutes. His tone was part pleading, part commanding. I might have respected it if I didn't know he was skilled at this sort of thing. His wife sniffed and simply said, "Keys." The Major dug them out of his coat pocket, handed them over and said, "I'll text you when I'm on my way. You can come back here, okay? Kids, behave for your mother. I'll be back soon." Then he turned to me. "Okay, Lucas, this is your time. Shall we?" He pointed towards the door. I nodded again and started to leave. "Oh, wait," he said as his family moved past me. Need to pay the bill first, he joked, holding up his wallet with a grin. I followed him to the desk as he paid quickly, watching out the window while his family got into a small SUV and drove off. Okay, he said, facing me again. I know you have questions and I'm here to help. I have about 90 minutes, so let's find a private place to talk. We stepped outside, and I was glad I had taken the SUV instead of the motorcycle that morning. Unsure of what was happening, we climbed in, and I decided the best route was home. It was only 10 minutes away, and I had a nice deck that faced the water, providing some peace. The major seemed to know about my place, as he said, "Let's go see your view. I hear it's nice, with the water and all." I kept quiet while we drove. I had learned from my past that sometimes it's best not to share more than needed. Let him do the talking. He didn't say much during the drive, which was fine since I was deep in thought. What was he doing here? How did he find me? What did he want? And what was with his family? Were they really his family? Or was it all a cover like I had been for Clarissa? We arrived quickly. I parked and we stepped out. He looked around and said, "Yes, nice place. The pictures I saw don't do it justice." "Pictures?" I asked as I opened the front door. "Of course, you don't think they aren't watching, do you? They need to be sure you're doing well, or if you're living a good life, I don't know." "Probably more of the former than the latter, if I can judge," he said cheerfully, as if it was no big deal. For him, it probably wasn't. "How about we grab a beer?" he suggested, waving to the window. "I'm not driving, and I bet you won't want to after everything I have to share. Let's sit outside and enjoy the morning. I can get a ride back into town later, okay?" I grabbed 2 beers and followed him outside to the 2 chairs by the back sliding door. "Ah," he said, sinking into one of the chairs and taking a long sip. "This is the life. You really got lucky here, Richard. Sorry, Lucas." He shifted a bit and I stayed quiet, waiting for him to speak. He moved in the chair again, seeming a little uneasy. "All right, well, what should I tell you? First of all, I'm no longer in the security services. I left just over 2 years ago. The family situation changed, with the kids and everything. Now I work for myself. I do security consulting, train bodyguards, help protect against corporate spying, and that sort of thing. I keep informed and share information when it comes my way. I still have many contacts, you know how it is. Not officially working for anyone, but unofficially working for a lot of people. It keeps me busy and makes sure I have income." He paused to take another sip before continuing. "My wife knows about my past work and understands some of what I do now, which is why she wasn't shocked when you showed up. That sort of thing happens. She's just upset it happened during our vacation. And yes, this wasn't a coincidence, as you might have guessed. I came here specifically to see you." He stopped and looked at me, probably checking my reaction. Given the last time we met, I wasn't exactly happy to see him. He noticed that. "Listen, I'm not here to hurt you or upset your peace. I'm here because, well, when we last met, my mindset was different. A lot has changed since then. Family, my job, everything. I see things differently now. I know I said some things that were technically true but meant to hurt, and I apologize for that. I thought about how I felt. Did it matter? Not really to me, but it might to him. Whatever." Seeing I hadn't yelled at him yet, he continued, "Lucas, there's some background you need to understand about who Clarissa is. Well, she probably is, but I'm not. This is confusing. Let me explain how things are in the world. You'll understand better if I explain." He leaned back, took a sip of his beer, and gazed out over the water past my property. "I worked for MI6 for a long time, just like Clarissa. Some of what she told you about her past is true, but some is not. Her mother passed away when Clarissa was 7. She never met her father, who died in the Navy during the Falklands War. The woman you met was a retired staff member who still helped us with minor jobs and cover stories, just like she did for you. Clarissa and I were both recruited while we were at university. I attended Hertfordshire University. She is older than me by 2 years. Most field agents come from military backgrounds, often from intelligence groups. I came through the Army, while Clarissa joined without prior experience, although she has a rank in the Air Force. It's a holdover from the World War II Special Operations executive. In the field, rank doesn't carry much weight. I've had to give orders to generals, and they follow them because they understand my experience. Clarissa currently holds the rank of colonel, which is quite high for someone still working in the field. She might reach general one day, but that would likely mean she's working behind a desk instead of being active in the field. So how do I fit into all this? I asked, finally interrupting. Doesn't seem like she needs a husband. To explain that, I have to share more background. There's a lot to understand about how things ended up this way. He paused, took another large sip of his beer, and looked at the bottle to check how much was left. Clearly, it wasn't enough. This is thirsty work. Maybe I should grab another? Go ahead and get it yourself, I said, taking small sips from mine. He gave me a wry smile and went into the kitchen, coming back with another bottle. Once he settled down, he continued. All right, Lucas. I don't know how much you understand about being a field agent for British intelligence, but it's not like it is shown on TV or in movies. We don't go out looking for supervillains or having countless adventures, and we don't just eliminate people without thought. Field agents, or operators as we call ourselves, are used thoughtfully for specific situations. We recruit particular targets, for instance. Once a person is recruited, they work with a handler who reports to a spy master. That person manages a certain group of assets. These can be anyone from an office cleaner to the partner of an officer, or even the officer themselves with various roles in between. We look for opportunities, whether it's for money, ideas, or personal connections. Everyone we work with has something we can use, and it's our job to find it and make it work. That's part of being an operator. We do other jobs too. We help people get out of tough situations where things are unsafe, but they still matter to us. Sometimes we are called in to get information that someone can't give us for various reasons. I think you can see that an operator's job can be quite broad. We aren't pretend spies, but we have skills and face very risky situations. And at some point, luck can run out. We all know that when we step in. But we are all very enthusiastic and proud, yet between you and me we can also be a bit self-centered. We think we are better than our rivals and want to show it. The leaders know this and use it. Now that I look back, it's clearer to me. However, this job is also very isolating. You can't talk about it with just anyone, only with other operators. You learn to bend the truth and it becomes a habit. You often keep people away from what's real as you see it. You can become suspicious, but sometimes for good reasons. The main issue is that you lose touch with regular people. You can't be honest with anyone, even your family. On top of that, you can learn so much about anyone, thanks to technology that others don't have, and your job is to outsmart the other side. It's no surprise that, over time, field agents drift away from the very society they are trying to protect. You'll hear a lot about how brave these operators are, risking their lives for freedom and the common good, but that's not always true. You quickly forget the people you're trying to help because you feel so different from them. It turns into a focus on the mission, trying to outsmart the other side, who are much like you. The goal becomes its own reason. It's not about seeing the bigger picture because you hardly ever do. You end up doing what the politicians want at that moment, trying to outdo your rivals and prove that you are more skilled. That's what it really is, a constant battle to prove who's better, regardless of the situation. Inside this force, thoughts like this become widely accepted and common. It fosters a strong us versus them attitude. He paused, took a drink, and gazed into the distance. Many operators stay stuck in that way of thinking. He sighed and added, "But I broke free." Thankfully. Anyway, in an environment like this, it's no surprise that many people burn out or become too stressed. When someone has a breakdown, it's not like in the movies. They don't become evil or try to take control of the world. Instead, they often mentally check out and might start writing their life stories with strange ideas or promoting odd theories. They don't turn into villains, but become a challenge to deal with, losing valuable team members that need to be replaced. So, how do we fix this? That's where you come in, or people like you. The thinking was that if individuals are feeling disconnected from others, they need reminders of who they are working for. They need to feel a connection to the people around them, like you. So, I was what? An emotional supporter? I replied, both intrigued and shocked. Well, you could see it that way, the major said slowly. The real aim was more to help ground the operators in reality. They needed to understand what life is like for everyone else. An outlet to be normal, whatever that means. Operators live in a world that isn't really normal. Everything feels like an act. They hide their true feelings. The idea was that they should have a part of life where they don't have to act. A space to relax and be themselves instead of who they think they should be to do their job. You understand, right? I did. It felt off, but yes, I got it. You were part of the pilot program. Clarissa and a few other operators were assigned to find a partner, someone they could really connect with, someone they didn't have to pretend to be an operator around. She went through several people before she met you. You turned out to be, as she said, just what she needed. Yes, I know, he added as I felt upset by his words. I understand that wasn't a kind way to describe you, but at that moment we all thought this project was foolish and treated it like a task. We approached it like a mission to finish, but didn't really invest emotionally. We did what we were told, and then, well, the higher-ups knew we wouldn't take it seriously, but they thought a real relationship couldn't exist without genuine feelings, right? You can't treat someone badly and expect things to work. You have to treat them as if they matter, and eventually that feeling becomes real. At least, that was the idea. He took a sip and looked at me seriously. And you know what? It actually worked. It did for Clarissa, and it did for me too. You can see how it still affects me. Does it matter if it worked for me? I asked, picking up my bottle again, not really caring what he thought. It's nice that I was chosen. Was I just the right kind of naive? Too trusting? Just a bit too clueless to ask questions or notice anything? Well, that's where things went wrong, isn't it? The plan focused on the skilled operators who needed a lot of training and were a bit fragile, not on the people like you who supported them. Honestly, that part was not thought through very well. Some of what you just said is unfortunately true. The partner needed to be someone who wasn't naturally suspicious, someone who would trust once a relationship was built. Not foolish, just not very observant. I'm sorry, but you fit that description, and more importantly, Clarissa liked you right from the start. They did a thorough check on you to ensure you were who you claimed to be. Even a personality study was done so Clarissa would know how to work with you. They figured out what might upset you and when she needed to adapt. A kind of guide for the relationship, if you will. We all had one for our potential partners. Wow, I said, feeling bitter. Well, again, I know it sounds terrible, but you need to see it from a different angle. They were trying to make your relationship smoother. Their goal was to remove friction before it started. If every couple had something like this before they got together, think how many more successful relationships there could be. Sure, in this case, the reasons were not pure-hearted, but the outcome was key. It led to a more peaceful relationship. There's nothing wrong with that. Well, yes, you would think that if you're the one getting these little reports. It doesn't respect those of us who thought we were figuring things out ourselves. The major cleared his throat and looked away. That's true, too. I sometimes forget that I'm now on the outside. We sat in silence for a while, both sipping our drinks without saying much. Finally, I broke the quiet. Was any of it true? I asked, the only question that really mattered. Did she ever love me? He looked at me, and for once I could see regret on his face. I don't know for sure. I think so. You'll have to ask her. I know I fell in love with my wife. I can only imagine what it was like for her. The truth is, we didn't discuss these things at work. I mean, how could we? We're trained to be tough, so it's not the sort of thing you talk about while cleaning your tools, you know? A thought crossed my mind. Did she hurt people? The major shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. I can't go into details. I know you signed an agreement, but that's only for the UK. Let's just say we were trained for anything, and sometimes things happen. I nodded sadly. So she had. Wonderful. Who had I really married? I guess when I stopped that plan, everything fell apart, right? The major chuckled. Not at all. You were seen as their biggest success. I was? I asked, puzzled. You showed that an operator could maintain a relationship and make it work. You cared so much for your wife that you would do anything for her, even after finding out the truth. That was considered a huge achievement. It's not like I had many choices, I pointed out. I was in a tough spot. Oh, don't think like that, the major replied, amused. You could have betrayed us or called for help. But even after I told your wife to leave you or worse, you protected us as we escaped. Even though our mission failed, that took real courage. It took me a long time to see what you did and the cost to you, all because you loved her. I once thought you were naive. Then I left the service and reflected on my life and what I've done, and then my wife and my kids. I realized a lot of things. That's why I'm here. I see now that I owe you my life. If you hadn't acted like you did, we would have faced serious trouble. They are good at getting the truth out of people. You deserve something for the way you were treated, far more than what we gave you in return. So I'm here to share some background on what happened. You deserve at least that. I can't tell you everything since I don't know it all, but I'll share what I can. He took a deep breath, stared out at the water for a moment, then turned back to me. Looking directly into my eyes with what seemed like a tear in one eye, he said slowly, "Thank you for saving my life. I don't know how else to express it." How do you respond to something like that? Saying it was nothing would not be true. I had lost 2 years of my life because of this, and I still didn't really understand who my wife was. It was easier to just nod, a bit awkwardly. That's what we do best, right? Avoid deep thanks, too much fuss, stay calm in every situation. To change the topic, I asked, "Did anything change after I found out about what you were doing? What was it anyway?" "That's something I can't really discuss," he said. "Let's just say Clarissa was trying to get some important information for us. It's safer this way for everyone, including you. Anyway, nothing significant changed." "Really?" I said, surprised. "I made a big scene because I didn't know what was happening. My wife lied to me and I figured it out, and then I followed her and—" Now, when someone in our line of work is about to get married, we make sure their partner is informed. Of course, there needs to be some safety measures in place first. "Safety measures?" I asked, feeling uneasy. "So they have to pressure them into marriage if they retaliate after learning the truth?" "No, it's meant to prevent them from sharing the truth if they react badly. Imagine finding out your fiancé is a spy and has lied to you. Most people wouldn't be happy about it. They might want to go to the media. Headlines like, 'My Life with the Spy,' would attract a lot of attention. The safety measures are just there to keep them from spilling secrets if they're upset. Surprisingly, most take it well. They're curious and even a bit impressed. That's the main change now. It's all about supporting our agents in the field." I sighed. "I'm glad I could help bring about this change," I replied, feeling down. "I know, and I'm sorry. I realize your view is different. It's not as easy when you're on the receiving end. About you disrupting the operation, how did that happen? We haven't fully understood it yet. I know the team talked to you after you were found, but I never saw that report." Clarissa knew things went wrong when at the surprise dinner she saw the group of princes arrive. She needed to leave, not just for her mission's sake, but to protect your relationship. They recognized her in her spy role, and if they had seen her, it would have caused trouble. She thought she escaped in time, rushed to the office, explained the situation. We made a story that we thought would fit, and she believed it would all settle down. "And then you showed up at the gathering," he said with a serious look. "She wasn't able to leave the dinner unnoticed. The table of princes sent a bottle of fancy wine to Miss Davies, and she didn't go straight home either. Her phone was off. They had mentioned meeting her on Wednesday. Clearly, she wanted to avoid someone and left as soon as they arrived." When I talked to Clarissa, she didn't explain why a group of unfamiliar people was sending her gifts or calling her by another name, and that story about her sitting in a park thinking, it didn't add up. So I decided to follow her that day to see what she was really up to. I disguised myself as a bike courier and went in. You know what happened next. "Oh, that makes so much sense now. We shouldn't have gone through with the plan that day. Too many unknowns." But Clarissa was determined. She thought she had everything under control. After we left, we were lost. "Were you part of their scheme? Had someone turned you? We had no answers at all." He paused and looked at me. "She never believed you were gone, you know. Even with what we were told, she didn't buy it. You are safe because she held on to that belief. We were warned to stay away, of course. Our agency had people nearby, and the police arrived quickly. If you were still alive, you weren't being held there. But you weren't seen entering the embassy either. The higher-ups figured you had been taken somewhere safe and removed. The Saudis are good at that. We still don't know how they managed to get you into the embassy in the first place. But if you were anywhere, it would have been there. Clarissa knew that, just like the rest of us. We were briefed, given new tasks, and told to move on. Clarissa stood firm. She became a legend because of it, the woman who put her work above everything, even her relationships. She's admired for that." He glanced my way again. I just sat there, quietly staring at the water. But that was just a mask. She worked tirelessly when she was here and even when she was abroad. She got called in multiple times and faced scrutiny. She focused all her efforts on stirring up opposition against the Saudi government in the UK. It didn't matter how, she just wanted to provoke change. She was quite skilled at it, remember? She rallied support and got people to speak up, which led to the embassy being overwhelmed. Not before she quietly neutralized some of the security to make it easier. The Saudis are always careful with security and ready to use force if needed, so when the crowd gathered, she made it simpler for them to get in. She was present when they forced their way inside. She was in the building when they found you, and she called for help. She is the reason you are still here, and the British services know this. Everyone does. But no one will call her out on it. It's all just ignored. You came back, and the government had to decide what to do with you. They made a real effort to help you. They understand what you went through and didn't want to make it worse. If Clarissa had even a hint that you weren't being looked after, well, she's a powerful figure in that group. She would have been watching everything closely. He paused, unsure of what to say next. I took a moment to think about everything he had shared. Some of it felt right, but I wasn't sure how it changed my feelings at that moment. So, if she cares so much, where is she? I asked, looking straight at him. Why are you telling me all this instead of her? He shifted again, picked up another bottle, opened it, and took a long drink. Because she's scared. She's afraid of you, he replied after some time. Oh, I find that hard to believe, I said, rolling my eyes. A strong, secret agent woman who shakes up countries? Why would she be afraid of me? Because I think she cares for you. You represent everything she feels she has failed at. From the beginning, she controlled the situation. She misled you. She hurt you in ways that matter, especially while you were still together. When her choices put you in danger, she turned away. What she did, without concern, makes her question everything she stands for. It shows her true self, a risk-taker who only thinks about her own excitement, not about who gets hurt. She can't face you because it would show her what she has done, so she won't. She'll follow the reports and pull strings from behind the scenes, but she can't meet you in person or she would have to confront her own actions. He paused for a moment, taking another drink. At least that's my take on it, he said, burping after finishing. What do I know? You should ask her yourself if you ever get the chance. She'll be truthful with you when she won't be with anyone else. Is she? I hesitated for a moment. Did I really want the answer? Is she still with the government? You know, as an agent? Last I heard, yes. She told me she was training the next generation of agents. Apparently they are quite afraid of her because of her reputation. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure why. Figures. She won't talk about you, you know. When people ask, she avoids the topic. It's like you're a closed subject, even to her supervisors. I think everyone has learned not to ask about that anymore. Is she seeing anyone? I asked, unsure if I actually wanted to know. It's hard to say with her. She keeps everything private. There's nothing scheduled, though, so if she is, it's a secret. But I doubt it. I do know she has stopped some of her past activities. Do I even want to know what you mean by that? I replied, taking a drink. Probably not, the Major said with a small smile. He looked at his watch and sighed. Well, I have to go. Fiona will only wait so long. She's already a bit annoyed with me. He took out his phone and opened an app. Just calling a ride. You don't have to drive me. You probably just want to think about what we talked about. He fiddled with his phone for a moment and then said, There, the car will be here in 8 minutes. He looked at me and said slowly, Look, Lucas, I can't apologize for her or her choices, but it might help if you see her as a bit of a victim, too. I made a noise of disbelief and said, Really? Yes, she chose this path, but it has cost her. She has no husband, no kids, and no chance of that now. Her only family is her colleagues, and many don't make it. It's tough to get too close, you know. He paused and finished his drink. She didn't want this. She was put in this position. She was ordered to deceive you. I know she did it, and that hurts your relationship, but think about this. First, you had a good relationship with her until the truth came out. You thought she was everything you wanted, right? He looked at me until I nodded hesitantly. Second, if you want to be angry at those who believed manipulating you was okay. She didn't want to mislead you, but she had to do her job. And she did a good job of it, keeping you safe from what she really faced. He paused again, watching me closely. I didn't nod this time. I had my own thoughts. Finally, they were right. She became more grounded because of you. She was determined to protect what she had. You were her motivation. I believe she truly cared for you. It seems like you both loved each other, but things just didn't align right in your lives. It's unfortunate, and I'm sorry for what happened. For what they did to you, for what she did to you, and for my part in it. His phone buzzed, and he checked it quickly. My ride is here. I need to go now. You won't see me again, Lucas, but thank you for giving me a second chance. I hope things get better for you, too. Start living your life and leave the past behind. There is so much more life ahead, my friend. Thanks for the drink. He stood up, waved goodbye, and walked around the side of the house, likely to where his ride was waiting. I remained seated, staring at the water, unsure of what to feel next. The second big change in my life came when I met Susan. She sometimes went by Susanna and occasionally Sue, but never Susie. That name was reserved for her ex-husband, and she did not want it used by anyone else. We met at a nearby bar called Scruffy Ducks. I wasn't sure why it had that name, but I found that bars in the U.S. often have strange names. Back home, pubs were mostly named things like the King's Head or the Dolphin Hotel. Here, they were more unique. One was called Irwin's Bar, while another clever name was Whiskey A Go-Go. This one was Scruffy Ducks. It wasn't a complete dive bar. I later learned that a dive bar typically has no windows, and this place had a row of large windows. Still, it wasn't in great shape. It had once been nicer. You could tell by the carved wooden bar, the mirrors behind it, decent restrooms, and even a small kitchen that was closed at the time. There was also a little outdoor area where you could enjoy a drink and watch people passing by. There were a few flat-screen TVs, but also a real dartboard, not one of those plastic ones, 2 pool tables, and some classic arcade games. It was quite an American bar in spirit. However, it was also quite worn down. Clearly, no one had spent money on it in a long time. It looked tired and used. Since I arrived in the U.S., I had decided to follow one of the American sports. I had always cheered for Arsenal back home, but watching a UK game in a US bar was nearly impossible. Wanting to fit in, I thought I would try one of the sports that Americans enjoy so much. I considered baseball, but after attending a game, I realized 2 things. First, it was very similar to a game called Rounders that kids play back home. The rules were almost the same. Sure, the ball was harder and the bat was longer, but it felt familiar. The second realization was that people at the game spent as much time talking and socializing as they did paying attention to the field. The game itself moved at a slower pace, even more so than cricket, and that was saying a lot. That didn't happen. I looked into ice hockey, but there wasn't a local team to support, at least not one in the NHL. So I had to choose between the NFL or the NBA. I considered the Philadelphia Eagles, but I didn't really understand the NFL rules or strategies. It looked a bit like rugby, but it wasn't, so I skipped that. This left me with the NBA. The closest teams were the Philadelphia 76 ERs or the Washington Wizards, but they hadn't been doing well in recent years. So I decided to watch as many games as I could before choosing a team to follow. Every true fan knows that you usually watch games with other people. But I didn't have friends to join me, so I went to a bar. I ended up at Scruffy Ducks. The staff there were not very friendly, but the drinks were cheap, and the regulars were calm, even when they had a few. One good thing was that I could ride my motorbike there since it was just a couple of miles away on back roads. This meant I could have a drink and still feel safe riding home. Unless it was raining heavily, then I would take an Uber. I had visited the bar a few times when I met Sue. She came in while I was sitting with some regulars, listening to their thoughts on NBA teams. She joined us because she knew everyone there. After we were introduced, she started sharing her views on NBA teams, players, and stadiums. She was quite lively. She had red hair, though I found out later it was dyed. She was a few years older than me, but didn't look it, reminding me of a younger version of a famous singer. Her face showed experience, and her personality was bold. She never held back on her opinions and didn't care much about what others thought. I saw her again a few days later when I stopped by for a drink. The more I came, the more often I noticed her there. At first, I wondered if she had a drinking problem because she was there so much, until I learned more about her. After that first meeting, she would often come over to where I was sitting with her drink and chat with me. We had some enjoyable conversations about our backgrounds. Because she was from the USA and I was from the UK, we had very different stories to share. I taught her about shows like The Magic Roundabout, Trumpton, and Blue Peter, and she told me about Sears Toughskins, Captain Kangaroo, and Schoolhouse Rock. We talked about sports, movies, and all kinds of topics. I had forgotten how nice it was to spend time with a beautiful woman and just relax. I might have talked too much, but it felt good. I learned more about her life. She actually owned the bar, at least on paper. She and her ex had owned it together after she got it from her father. He had joined her in running it for a while, but he turned out to be a poor landlord and had a bad gambling habit. He got caught up in a poker game in Boston and lost a lot of money. When he returned to Salisbury, he thought he was safe. But the people he owed money to found him, as he wasn't careful about hiding. They came looking for what he owed, and things got very rough. He couldn't back up his big talk when it mattered, and it caused a lot of trouble for both of them. Eventually, he left in the night, took their money, and disappeared along with his truck, leaving her behind. She then had to face the loan sharks looking for their share. Since they couldn't find him, they targeted her instead. She had been pushed around before they forced her to sign over more than half of the bar to them. That made them the main owners, but she was still responsible since her name was on the loans. Every couple of weeks, half of the bar's alcohol orders disappeared, taken away without her knowing what happened to it. She tried to get help from the local police, but they asked her to prove everything. When she couldn't, they lost interest. She suspected that the group she was dealing with had connections with the police, so she felt stuck. Still, she wasn't going to give up easily. This bar belonged to her father, and she cared about it deeply. 49% of a bar is better than nothing, she said, and took a drink to cheer herself up. She wasn't allowed to run the bar anymore. The new owners put their own people in charge and did the bare minimum to keep it open without spending money on repairs. But Susan was determined to fight for what was hers. She cleaned up every morning and made sure there was enough drinks ordered. Sometimes she worked behind the bar when needed. Her story was a sad one. Her ex-husband never returned, and she divorced him for leaving 2 years after he left. Since then, she hadn't been interested in or had time for any kind of serious relationship. I shared my own story with her. My wife had led a secret life, and when I found out, I was hurt and needed a long time to recover. I ended up with a good financial outcome and now enjoyed a comfortable life by the water, just outside Salisbury. She accepted my story without much question. I explained the scar on my leg, the eye issue, and the trouble with my fingers by saying motorbike accident. She never asked about my ear, if she even noticed it. Somehow we became a couple. It felt strange because we never had a conversation where we declared, "We are together, we are in love." It just happened naturally. Our connection was not overwhelmingly passionate, but we had our moments. She liked to take the lead. We never discussed moving in together, we just started doing things side by side. We enjoyed dinners, movies, and took a trip to Washington, D.C. to see some shows. We even vacationed together in Florida. It became clear to our friends that we were a couple because we received invitations to events as a pair. Yet we never labeled ourselves as something more than just enjoying each other's company. We kept our own homes and didn't depend on each other too much. She had her own hobbies, and I kept to mine. We never discussed being exclusive, but I felt that I was committed, and I sensed she was too. I didn't hear about any other men in her life, and no one spoke of her being seen with anyone else. The word that best described us was comfortable. She never pushed me for more than I was ready to give, and I felt the same way about her. We were like very close friends who shared a special bond. There were moments when she looked at me as if to say something important, but then she held back. I think she sensed that something was off about my past. I didn't talk about my history in detail because, in this new life, I really didn't have one. I think she may have wanted something deeper, but I wasn't in a position to offer that yet. The hurt from the past was still too close to the surface. So many things felt unfinished for me, and I realized I was stuck in that loop. I didn't want to risk losing what we had, so I chose not to bring up any of these feelings. I kept things as they were and just enjoyed the time we spent together, never moved past that stage. And then the third thing happened. Clarissa showed up. It had been almost 2 years since I last saw the Major, and I had no idea she was coming. I got home after going to the grocery store, which was a term I still hadn't gotten used to. Back home, when you say you are going shopping for groceries, you mention the store you will visit. I'm just going to Waitrose, or I'm stopping at Tesco to get some. But here, the store is never named. I'm going to the store, or I'm going to the drugstore. It feels strange. As Shaw once said, two countries divided by a common language. Anyway, I got home, carried my 3 paper bags of groceries, kicked open my front door, and walked into the kitchen. I almost dropped the bags when I saw her sitting in my chair facing the kitchen. I wasn't sure what shocked me more, someone being in my house or that it was actually her. I stood frozen, staring at her, unsure what to do. Should I put the groceries away? Were there items that needed to be kept cold? After a moment, I decided to ignore the surprise. It's my house. I started taking things out of one of the bags and lined them up on the kitchen counter. "Hello, Rich," she said, smiling like someone who hopes for forgiveness but isn't quite sure. "Long time." I just grunted back and moved the tins of beans over to the pantry where they belonged. I sneaked glances at her while unpacking the first bag. She looked good. Her hair was dark and cut short, almost a bob, but with a parting. Same eyes, same mouth, a bit older with some lines around her eyes and mouth. Her nose looked slightly different. Had it been broken or altered? Her body seemed similar, but she had a scar on the back of her left hand. No rings. A nice watch on one wrist. Why did I care? Not like we shared anything in common anymore. I kept putting things away, making sure to look away from her. "Rich, I know this is a surprise. After all these years, I stopped unpacking and turned to her, leaning on the counter with both hands. "You just what?" "Thought you'd drop by the ex-husband." "Wait, not ex-husband. We were never legally married, were we? You thought you'd stop by because you were nearby?" "Right. You don't visit places you don't want to be." And, I added as it hit me, "No car? Did you walk here?" "It's down the lane. Old habits." She tried to smile, but I wasn't interested. "So why are you here?" I asked plainly. "We were married," she said softly, leaning up in the chair. "It was real. The Major had no idea what he was doing. He could be a bit foolish at times. I wanted to be sure it was real, even if I faced trouble from my superiors when it became known." "Well, finally! Something is real! What a surprise!" I shouted, grabbing the frozen peas, tossing them into the freezer, and closing the door with a bang. I took a deep breath. It was easy to feel angry, and I had my reasons. But this was a chance to get some answers. The real question was, what did I want to know? Honestly, it was more about what didn't I want to know. She could see me standing still, my muscles tense and my breathing heavy. "I deserve this," she said softly, "and even more." "Why are you here, Clarissa? Is that really your name now?" I asked calmly. I just wanted to understand. A different name might make it easier to deal with everything. "I'm Donna now," she replied. "And you are Lucas, right? I know it's hard to change. To me, you'll always be my Richie Rich. As for why I'm here, I wanted to see you. I wanted to check on you. Just looking in on an old FR." Her voice trailed off. For someone who is supposed to be a top spy, she doesn't seem ready for this, I thought. But she had spent years deceiving me successfully, so she could easily manage her way through this situation. So was she still deceiving me? If she was, what was the purpose? Why come here just to lie? I shook my head to clear my thoughts. It was pointless to overthink this. I might as well take her words at face value. "Friend?" I asked. "Is that who we are now, Donna?" I emphasized her new name. "Well, that's up to you." I paused and asked one of the few questions I truly cared about. "What am I to you, Clarissa?" She leaned forward, her gaze drifting to the floor. "Someone I care about. Someone I hurt deeply. Someone I left behind. Someone I really wish I could." She hesitated, then met my gaze again. "Someone I loved. And someone I want to reconnect with." I noticed how she spoke of love in the past tense. It didn't surprise me. I felt the same way. I wasn't sure how to respond to everything else she had said. "And how do we do that, Clarissa? How do we reconnect? You left me behind." "To be fair, Rich, you did tell me to," she said, crossing her arms. I couldn't argue with that, so I stayed quiet. "You meant everything to me," I said to the bag of groceries, pulling out another one to empty it. "I loved you fully. You were a very skilled deceiver. I have to give you that. I paused, holding a can of baked beans, wondering why the baked beans in the U.S. didn't compare to the ones back home. I found out later that our beans have sugar in them, which surprised me. Everything else in the U.S. seems to be full of sugar and salt, quite different from what we have back home. The bread here tastes strange because of all the extra ingredients. I looked at her closely. Was anything true? Was our relationship real? This was the big question I had wanted to ask for a long time. She looked away, then looked back at me. You need to understand how we met, Rich. It wasn't the usual way. I was following orders. I laughed a little. It occurred to me that she probably didn't know that Daryl had talked to me years ago and told me his side. I wasn't sure if his story was any more truthful than hers, but I was curious to see if they matched at all, so I chose not to share what I already knew. She sighed. Listen, I need to explain a little. I will answer your question, but you need some context to really get it. She paused, then asked, Can I have a glass of water? I went to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and tossed it to her. I was surprised at how similar her speech was to the Majors. Did they have the same training? After opening the bottle and taking a drink, she continued, To understand my actions, you need to know about my past. My dad was a retired sergeant major and had traveled a lot. My mom was a reporter. That's how they met. She was in Singapore and he was stationed there. I don't know why. I should look into that. I'm not sure if there was an army unit there. Anyway, I was born from their union. My dad, well, they say travel broadens your mind, but for him, it made him narrow-minded and very set in his ways. He had strong opinions about everything, and he didn't care for people who were different. My mom just went along with him. She didn't see his flaws. To her, his quirks were reasons why he was unique, and she loved that. She took a breath. They passed away when I was 15. So that woman I met? I asked. Mabel. She was a field agent once. She retired in the 90s, and like many who gave their lives to the service, found that it left her lonely. No friends, no family, just her little cottage in Brighton and memories she couldn't share. She sought small jobs so she could feel connected to something again. Following people, you know? Who would suspect they were being followed by an old lady with a little dog? Just small parts like the role of my mom, things like that. Clarissa looked off into the distance. She passed away last year. There were hardly any people at her funeral. It was quite sad. They couldn't talk about her life or the achievements she had made in helping others. She turned her attention back to me. I always wanted to work in security services. Hearing Dad's stories about his work, the mistakes, the fighting, and the greed from both sides, I felt drawn to that world. I saw Dad's limited views, but his experiences shaped me. I knew what I wanted to do, so I made sure I was prepared for recruitment. After my parents passed away due to an accident with a heater in their room, I moved in with my uncle when I was 15. He worked in civil service and understood what was needed for my goals. He could guide me on which universities were important and what courses mattered. So I followed his advice, and during my last year of school, I was asked about my level of patriotism, which led to more questions and, eventually, an invitation to apply for a civil service job. She paused to take a drink. It's really humid here, isn't it? She commented before continuing. I worked my way up. Things are not as difficult for women now as they used to be. Once you get in, it's not just about who you know, it's about your creativity, your courage, and your willingness to be firm. I did well, and I think you can guess what kind of person I've become. The downside is that many people in my field experience burnout. They start to lose their grip on reality, seeing things that aren't there or reacting wrongly to situations. She shrugged at me. This can be a problem. The service believes it happens because people become out of touch with regular life. She emphasized regular life with her fingers. They may have a point. You don't often get many friends outside of work since you can't share the truth about what you do or your frequent absences. She looked down when she said this, aware of how it sounded. The service thought it would help employees stay connected to the real world if they found a partner. I was part of the first group they tried this with. There were 5 of us. I scoffed lightly. Of those 5, how many are still together? 2, she quickly replied. 1 died while on duty. 2 are still together, although their partners found out about what happened with us. 1 divorced for unrelated reasons. And then there's us. No second chances for you then? No, she replied simply. Once was enough. I felt a bit offended by that. No, she said, noticing my reaction and raising her hand to calm me. I don't mean it like that. I just couldn't go through that again. What I put you through, what happened to you, how I felt after you were taken, how I feel now. I could never put someone else through that. I couldn't handle it either. Not because you still care about me? Just because of what happened? I asked. I wasn't sure I would get a clear answer, but I thought it was worth asking. I'm getting to that, she answered cautiously. Anyway, I went looking for you. You weren't really on my mind, if that's what you're wondering. You were a wonderful surprise. Right from our first meeting at that wedding, I knew we could have something special together. Be a perfect match, you know? She took another sip of water. I noticed she was passing the bottle between her hands, which was her way of showing she was focused on what she was saying. When she fiddled with things in her hands, it meant she was thinking deeply about one thing. Were you related to me, or? I asked suddenly as the thought popped into my head. Yes, I was, just like I told you, but not in the way I mentioned before. Anyway, you were just what I needed. Honest, smart, funny, down to earth, had a plan for your life, a charming smile. Naive, I chimed in. I would say innocent, she said with a playful smile. You checked all my boxes. I could totally see myself with you, being your partner. As long as you let me, I interrupted again. She sighed and continued. You got every part of me that I shared, and about those parts I didn't share. Well, let's say you probably wouldn't want to know them. You got the best of me, honestly. Within those limits, you had all of me. But not all of you, while you had all of me, I shot back. I was getting frustrated with all this talk. She paused and just looked at me. Is this what today is? Critiquing me day? Do you want me to talk or not? She asked. I think I've got a reason to, I replied, a bit softer, tucking my hair behind my ear to make my point. She sighed. Yes, you do. Still, let me finish. This is hard for me. I motioned for her to go on, rolling my eyes inside. Hard for her. Really? You checked all the boxes the program needed too. They looked into you deeply. You were solid, so for them it was good to go. We got along and I was happy. For once, a program really worked. We were all really happy. We were close and had a life outside of work. Sure, our jobs needed to change a bit. No more long undercover assignments. But we didn't do many of those anyway. It worked for everyone, even for you. I know you were happy. I was certainly happy. Of course you were. Your foolish husband waiting at home while you enjoyed the excitement of spy work all day. Tell me, Clarissa, how many men were there while we were married? I really want to know. I asked this to remind her that things were not as perfect as she liked to say. She looked away from me again. Not many. Sometimes it was necessary. I was trained to do that kind of work, but I hardly ever did. Only when I had to. It was work, not something I wanted. You were enough for me at home, really. I was satisfied there. I did what the job needed. The job existed before you. And it was still there while I was away. I finished, putting the second bag away and starting on the third. How many? I pressed again. How would knowing that help anyone? She replied. How many? I shouted, hitting the bottle of olive oil on the table to make my point. The room fell silent until she quietly said, 7. Another long pause followed. And what that major said about us not being married. She rolled her lips, a sign that she was hesitating to speak. They wanted to keep the marriage hidden. It was for both our protections. If someone found me, they wouldn't be able to trace you through records, she said. Oh, come on, I said, not believing it. Our lives were connected. We had shared bank accounts, joint insurance, a joint mortgage. Even without a marriage certificate, I would be easy to trace. Try again? Okay, she said, putting down the bottle and raising her hands. Fine, you want the truth? They didn't want any chance of this coming back to them. If someone discovered our situation, they wouldn't be able to sue us for anything if we weren't officially married. It wasn't a nice thing, but that's the way it was. Wow, I muttered softly. But you said. I asked, putting mushrooms into the fridge. Yes, well, that was my way of rebelling. I really liked you. I loved you. I wanted it to be real. I didn't care what the service wanted. What could they do once it happened? Take it all back? They were upset, but it wouldn't have changed anything. I just wanted that for us. For us. So my question was answered, sort of. As to your original question, yes, everything I showed you was real. As real as it could be, she added at the end. What does that mean? It means that while everything I showed you was real, it wasn't everything there was to show you. I couldn't tell you about my job. I couldn't come home and share my worries if things went wrong at work. I couldn't complain to you about office problems. I couldn't explain the pressure I was under. You were not able to be there for everything I needed you for. Not because you wouldn't have, but because I couldn't tell you. I thought about that for a moment. I understood what she meant. That was hard for her. It was hard for me, too, but I could see her point. Then another question popped into my head. Were we ever going to have kids? She snorted and then frowned. Knowing what you know now, what do you think? So, no? I pressed, wanting her to explain fully. Was I just going to be kept in the dark? No, she said, sitting back and running a hand through her hair. At some point, for health reasons, I wouldn't have been able to have kids. Honestly, that made me feel very guilty, not being able to give you that. And you would never have known the truth. On top of all the stress from my job, I thought about letting you go so you could find someone who could give you those things. But selfishly, I just wanted you with me. I needed you. I still do, truth be told. But I'm not sure you would want me now, with all my baggage. So, you admit it was selfish? I challenged her. She let out a humorless laugh. You don't really understand, Rich. I worked for a security service. Do you know how long I was expected to last? 4 years. 4 years until something bad happened to me. I'm already beyond that. I was expected to be selfless and to put myself at risk if it was needed. We actually have a guide for that. I was putting myself in danger for my country every day. So I was a little selfish with you. That's why you were there. That was the whole point. And what about me? When did I get to be selfish? I asked. Well, yes, that's where it all gets tricky, doesn't it? She replied tiredly. She looked at me. I'm sorry, Rich. What I did, what they made me do, how it affected you, the manipulation, all of it. Now that I have some distance, I see how wrong it was. You paid a heavy price for my lies, and I truly am sorry. You are my greatest failure, both in my work and as a person. I don't know how else to express it. What we did to you was something we can never take back. An awkward silence filled the room. I decided to break it by asking, what about that holiday in Spain we were supposed to take? Did something happen at work? She nodded and replied, yes, we had a situation that went wrong there the week before. Someone important was exposed, and it caused a lot of trouble. The idea of anyone traveling to Spain during that time was too risky. We could have easily been caught in a difficult situation, so that trip had to be canceled. I'm sorry. Usually my other job doesn't interfere this way. I worked hard to keep things separate, but in this case, well... She shrugged with a slight smile. The trip to Maryland was nice, though. You have to admit that. I nodded back, a hint of regret in my expression. It was indeed nice. Still, I would have preferred Spain. Another silence fell as we searched for the right words. I thought that since she hadn't spoken to the major, she probably didn't know how I figured out that she wasn't quite who she seemed to be. I might as well share the story. In case you're curious, when you hurried out of the Dorchester that day, that table of your target sent us an expensive bottle of wine for someone named Miss Davis. They mentioned seeing you that Wednesday. It seemed like you were hiding from them, and that's when I suspected something was off. I dressed as a delivery person and followed you to work. Then I saw you leave for that event with the major, looking different from when you left for the day. That made me suspicious. I followed you there, pretending to be a courier, and, well, you know what happened next. She nodded, softly saying, so that's how you ended up there. Mistakes are often simple like that. Good to know. The service thought you might have switched sides after we returned. I told them that was nonsense. We just didn't understand how you figured things out. It turns out you didn't really just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Realizing what she said, she looked at me, her eyes wide. I didn't mean it was good that you got caught. I meant, I understand what you meant, I said, cutting her off. Another uncomfortable silence settled between us. It was becoming a pattern. I want you to know I helped get you out, she said quietly. I stirred things up to help. The service didn't want me involved at all. We were told to avoid any operations there. They were already cautious. I think they were trying to find you. We returned to the venue, and there were police there almost immediately, so there wasn't a chance for them to, well, get rid of you if you were hurt, but there was no sign of you, so we knew you were okay. We thought you were either at the embassy or had been taken somewhere else. No one seemed to go into the embassy, so people assumed you weren't there, but I felt sure you were close by. I could sense it. I tried 3 times to get the go-ahead to look for you, but each time I was told no. They considered you too risky. I believe they were just relieved you were gone. It meant one less problem for them to deal with. When you showed up, they didn't know how to handle you. That Thurgood fellow put you on a strict watch, gave you some money, and just observed you for a year to see what you would do. You slipped away, and he was fine with that. He still has people keeping an eye on you and monitoring your activities, just to know what you're up to. If he even thinks you might spill any secrets, he wouldn't hesitate to act against you. All that legal talk? That's just a way to remind you how dangerous your situation is, without outright making threats. She picked up the bottle and drank the rest. I knew you were inside that embassy. I was part of a team that intercepted a Saudi agent in Cairo. During questioning, he mentioned something about the mystery man in the basement in England. He didn't know much else, but I understood what it meant. I took it to my superiors, but they didn't care. I was told to drop it. I had no idea how she managed to say that so emphatically, but she did. They told me not to pursue it and warned me against getting involved, even threatening to note a reprimand on my record. I wasn't allowed near the embassy, so I had someone else look into it for me. It took a long time to find the right group who would take action. I dropped enough hints to stir up their anger and got them to act. I may have guided them from afar. I had some friends involved who were there to handle security. The Saudis are very protective, and they wouldn't have hesitated to deal with any trouble if they were able to. She set the empty bottle down and leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, hands clasped in front of her, looking at me with sincerity. When they found you, I couldn't believe it. I was the one who called for help. I stayed by your side for days. I faced a lot of trouble from my bosses. They suspected who was behind the plan, even if they couldn't prove it. But it was worth it. You saved me, even after I had turned my back on you, and that fool I was with tried to make it worse to give himself a reason to act against you so we could escape. Her voice began to tremble. I couldn't come to you until now. I couldn't face you. The only man I've ever cared about, and I left you in danger. The mission always comes first, she said, her voice filled with frustration and anger. Look what happened to you. It's all because of me and that job I was so committed to. You didn't ask for any of this. You just wanted a wife and a normal life, and instead, you got me and everything that came with it. You suffered because of my mistakes. 2 years of your life were lost. I can't imagine how you managed. I've seen the reports, but I know they don't tell the full story of what you went through. The hopelessness. You mentioned some of it when they questioned you. At that moment, she broke down in tears, blaming herself. I am thankful you got me out, I said, holding my hands up. But I have to mention that the only reason I was in that situation was because you were so focused on pretending to be something you weren't. She looked lost, and even though she was still crying, I heard her softly say, Yeah. Honestly, I didn't know how to respond. She was saying all the things I had wanted to shout at her if we ever confronted this moment. Now she was expressing it better than I could. This was the regret and sadness I wanted to see in her. The pain she felt, the truth about who she was and what she'd done, the cost I had paid. Yet it didn't make things better. Nothing could change what had happened. I could say I forgave her, but we both knew it wouldn't mean anything. It would be just words, and even if I meant it, would it help either of us? She sat there, crying for several minutes, taking deep breaths with her face hidden in her hands. I let her be. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't just hold her and pretend everything was okay when it wasn't. From her dishonesty to the broken promises, and the 2 years I lost, none of it was something I could overlook. The fire of anger had faded, but the memories were still there. I still had nightmares that disturbed my sleep. I realized this was why I had kept my distance from Susan. It was too difficult to explain. Eventually, her tears slowed, and she looked up at me with red, pleading eyes. Say something, Rich, please. I'm at my breaking point. Tell me you hate me. Tell me to go away. Just please, say anything. Clarissa, I loved you. I believed you loved me too. Those years we were together were the best of my life. Even though everything was built on lies, I still don't regret being with you. Even if I was not the main person in your life, you were very important to me. I will not hate you. I dislike your actions, but not you as a person. I see why you acted the way you did, but I cannot forgive those actions. That is something you must deal with on your own. I took a deep breath. If you want my forgiveness, you can have it. I don't think you will know how to use it, but consider our past settled. I've started a new life, and it's decent. I have some money, freedom to make my own choices, and I go on dates sometimes. While I'm not perfectly happy, I feel content. That's about all I can ask for right now. It's better than what I expected when I was in that tough situation. You got me out, and while we may not be even, we're not too far apart either. Take that as a sign. She was still breathing heavily and stared at me with those big eyes. I wasn't sure what was on her mind. Then she politely asked for a tissue. I stood up, grabbed one from the side table, and handed it to her. She used it in a way that was a bit funny. I smiled at how she had always sneezed loudly. I remembered laughing about it when we were together. I'm sorry, she said, sounding calmer now. Clarissa, Donna, whatever your name is, it's time to move on. I have moved on. I know this has been helpful for you, but it's time to stop dwelling on the past. Go and be the best you can be, free from me and what happened. Remember the past, but don't repeat the same mistakes. I'm okay. Go live your life. She continued to look at me before a small smile appeared on her face. Are you really okay? Well, I wouldn't say I'm completely okay. I still have my struggles, but I'm moving forward. That's in my past. I have a future now, or at least a part of one. Oh, about that woman you've been seeing? Clarissa asked, a spark of emotion in her eyes. It was clear she still felt something. Clarissa, you can't be upset about me having a life. You had your own moments while we were together. Those were just jobs, she said. I didn't want to. Whatever, I replied. This is my time to move on, so just accept it. Another silence hung between us. Okay, she finally said, then brightened. I also came to give you something. I wondered why you're here now, I said. Why after all these years? If you couldn't see me then, why now? She rummaged in her pocket, pulled out a small USB stick, and held it out to me. Because of this. It's for your protection. It has important information on it, but it's locked. Please don't try to guess the password. If you make 3 wrong tries, it will erase itself. No one knows about this. It was created on a laptop without internet, and now that laptop is gone. No one will come looking for it. Still, I'd suggest you keep it in a safe place. You'll understand the password when the time is right. That's already taken care of. Just think of it as something to hold on to. That's why I came now to give you this. I needed to see you for my own reasons, but this was the final push. She held out her hand, and I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to step back into her world. I could see it was linked to her life. In the end, the hope in her eyes got to me, and I walked over, taking what she offered and putting it in my pocket. I didn't even look at it. I chose not to touch her for some reason that felt important. She leaned back, looking more at ease now, and nodded at me. You'll know what to do with it when the time comes, she said again. I really wish I could do more. An apology doesn't feel like enough. I paused for a moment and then said, Well, there is one thing. I want you to make it happen, whatever it takes. Of course, she replied with a serious tone. Consider it done. I told her what I wanted and she nodded, fully understanding me. She smiled and said, I'll take care of it myself. You have my word. Can I ask one last question? I asked. Sure, she said. What's your real name? Is it Clarissa? She smiled mischievously, but then said softly, Rich, I just wish you knew how much you might not want to know. Then she checked her watch. I have to go. I have a flight to Jamaica tonight. Well, enjoy yourself, I said, a bit sarcastically. She stood up and paused next to the table I had brought from our home in the UK. It was filled with plants, maybe too many plants for the space. She ran her hand over the table and smiled, looking nostalgic. I always loved this table. Such great memories of when we found it. I'm really glad you kept it. Then she stepped in front of me. Her hand gently touched my cheek, and she leaned in to kiss me softly on the lips. I thought it would bother me, but surprisingly, it didn't. It felt like a closure, something that needed to happen. I did love you. It was real, Rich. Leaving you like that was the hardest thing I ever did, and I will always feel responsible. I'm so sorry for everything that happened, both to you and from me. Take care, my love. Live your life. Have the life I can never have and we can't have together, as much as I wish we could. Then she was gone, and I never saw her again. After she came back into my life, I tried to move on. True to her promise, Susan handled my request. Her partner was hesitant, but eventually signed over their share of the bar to her for $1. They also gave her a check to cover all the bar's debts and said it was hers again. They seemed nervous and polite, clearly believing she had strong connections. They even apologized for taking so long to fix things related to her ex's obligations. They assured her that she'd have no more problems, and if anything came up, she could reach out to them for help at no cost. Susan left the bar feeling confused but very happy. Her joy made me happy too. She didn't know the details, but she wasn't going to question her good luck. As for me, I kept living my life. I hinted to Susan about moving in together and possibly more. I had found the answers I needed, and once she moved in, even my bad dreams stopped. I placed a USB drive at the bottom of a tree on a small island in the bay behind my house. I wrapped it in plastic, enjoyed a picnic there on a sunny day, buried the leftovers in the USB drive, and then went home. I figured it was the smart thing to do, and no one ever came looking. Epilogue. 2.5 years later, while Susan and I were talking about wedding plans, I received a small newspaper clipping with a note. It was in my mailbox but had no stamp, so someone must have delivered it by hand. The note read, "Hey Lucas, sorry to bring you bad news, but she passed away a couple of weeks ago in an incident in Lebanon. She couldn't leave that life behind. I warned her it might end badly, but she said it might be time for that. I think she never fully recovered from what happened to you and felt deeply responsible for it. Her farewell at the office was huge. Many people owed their lives to her work. She was very well liked, so there's that. Enclosed is the official newspaper report. Most of the details aren't true, but the name is her real name. She always said I should let you know this way if something happened. She believed you'd understand. Sorry, my friend. Daryl. The clipping was the death notice for someone named Miriam Finchley. That was who my Clarissa really was, or had been Miriam Finchley. And she needed me to know this. I understood why. The next day, I took Susan for a picnic on the island where I had buried the USB key. I dug it up, sat Susan down, and shared everything. I told her about my marriage to Clarissa, my time in prison, the difficult experiences being released, and the British government's demands. I also mentioned the visit from the Major and the visit from Clarissa. Susan listened with surprise the whole time. After I finished, she looked at me in shock, placed her hand over her mouth, and then hugged me tightly. We brought the USB key back home. Using a computer that had no internet connection, I checked the password-protected folder. As I expected, the password was her real name, with the initials in capital letters, no spaces. Inside the folder, there were 2 files that I copied right away. I had been warned that the key could erase itself. One was a small text file named read_me_first, txt, and the other was a Word document called Memoirs of a Misspent Life by Miriam Finchley. I opened the first file, which had a message for me. Hey, Rich, if you are reading this, then I'm either dead or officially declared dead. I'm sorry about that. This is a book I wrote my memoirs. It includes selected stories about my experiences that reveal the truth about what we were doing. Not every detail is shared, just the stories that focus on certain individuals who deserve to be recognized for their actions. Everything in this book can be confirmed, which is why I chose these specific stories. It's mostly about holding accountable those who thought it was acceptable to ruin innocent lives. I know about the agreement they made you sign. It may restrict what you can write, but it doesn't say anything about me doing it. And since I'm no longer here, my reputation doesn't matter to me anymore. I want to take a few of these people down with me. What you do with this is your choice. If you decide to share it, do it in a way that doesn't connect back to you. There are powerful individuals mentioned in here, and some may not respond well. It's better to be safe. I really did care for you. I'm sorry for everything. Miriam. The second file contained Miriam's memoirs. Now I understood why she wanted to keep this hidden until after her passing, and why she was so worried that no one would find out. The contents were shocking. I read the book in 2 days. It told stories about her breaking into places, getting into fights, tricking people, and hurting others. It also shared the reasons why she was sent on these missions, the conflicts that led to them, and how much of it stemmed from personal pride and ego. Two important things stood out to me. First, even though Clarissa thought I knew her well, it became clear that I didn't know her at all. There were many things about her that I had never imagined. She claimed that this was just a small part of her story, and if that's true, then I was just a small part of her life. Second, I learned that the intelligence world is very complicated. While it aims to do good and protect people, a lot of it revolves around personal pride. Many of the people involved seem to have forgotten why they started their work in the first place. Personal pride often overshadowed important decisions, putting others at risk to satisfy their own feelings. In those stories, there was one about me. It explained what she had been told to do, how she did it, and the outcomes. Clarissa shared her feelings about her actions and how much she regretted what it did to me. There were some details I didn't know before, but overall it aligned with what she had already told me. Reading it was terrible, made worse by the fact that it was true. Susan and I talked about what to do with this sensitive information, and we eventually decided to take a trip. Susan drove me to Salisbury, where I randomly chose a car rental place, rented a car, and then we set off together with our luggage to Washington, D.C. There, we went to a dealership and bought a nice RV. It had plenty of features like a diesel engine, sliding sections, air conditioning, a TV, and a good shower. I transferred money from an account I had set up earlier and withdrew $40,000 in cash to use for spending. There was no way to trace that. Then we traveled across the country for the next 6 months, exploring various cities. We even visited Canada. In New York, I went to a Walmart and bought 40 USB drives, padded mailers, and a tablet. Whenever we stopped at a McDonald's, I would spend about an hour on the tablet looking for publishing companies worldwide. In each city I went to, I would send out padded envelopes with a USB stick inside and a note attached that said, "Do what you think is best with this USB stick." We sent these to 2 publishing companies in Australia, 3 in Germany, 2 in France, 1 in Russia, 2 in Spain, 3 in Canada, and 1 in New Zealand, among other places. They all came from random cities in the U.S. This was my way of keeping my identity hidden. In the end, the book was published in 15 different countries, after each one did their best to check the claims in it. At the close of our journey, I uploaded it to the internet with that tablet, sending it to as many places as I could, all anonymously. Good luck stopping that, UK Security Services. After that, I tossed the tablet into the ocean off Galveston, Texas. The book became a huge topic worldwide for months. It led to big changes in the UK government, with several top officials having to resign, including leaders of the CIA and MI6. It became quite a scandal for almost 6 months, and then, as often happens, something else took the spotlight. Still, I had made life harder for those who believed they could control me, all thanks to my wife. Her name was both damaged and restored after a movie portrayed her as a dedicated officer who followed orders but disliked what it made her do. Maybe it was true. It's hard to say for sure now. As for me, I stayed quiet. No one discovered my identity, and Susan and I got married the following year. We lived together happily, even with the quirks that come from sharing life with a spirited redhead who owns a bar. I still can't decide if meeting Clarissa McDonald was a good thing or not. Hey everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.